Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had Two Best Friends at UA? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic plus. Near Gang Orca's hero agency. The world has definitely changed. An atmosphere of unease seemed to permeate the very air throughout the country of Japan as a single question floated around in the backs of everyone's mind. What will we do now that All Might's gone? For most civilians, they went about their daily lives like before, seeking comfort and what security that could be found within the familiarity of their routines. But for the lawless ones who'd been in hiding or the people who'd ordinarily think twice about committing a crime, it was different. It was a time of opportunity. Such individuals who'd exercise their quirks for personal gain were known as villains, and they already had an answer to the question of what to do. Come out of the woodwork, take what you want and raise havoc. That was exactly the plan of three villains as they rushed out of an electronics store with an entire cash register and whatever items of value they could carry. "We got the loot," yelled the lead criminal, a man with a blue bald head which was sporting pointed antennae. "Get ready to hustle." He was directing this order to another villain, a guy with an egg-shaped body with long arms and legs sitting in a van with the engine running. As soon as the group of three piled into the open side door of the vehicle, the egg villain floored the gas pedal. "Hey, what's the holdup?" questioned one of the running villains, a man with extraordinarily long hair which covered his entire face. "Why aren't we going anywhere?" Indeed, no matter how hard the Eggman pressed down on the gas, the only response he got was the sound of screeching tires and the straining mechanics of the engine. "It's like we're hung on something behind us," said the oval-shaped man as he tried in vain to get the van moving. The third runner, a person with one large purple eye where his face was supposed to be, looked out the back window to see what the issue was. Something did have a hold on the back of the van, a rather tall high school student with a muscular build and very short hair. He was simply standing there with his hand on the van's trailer hitch, looking almost bored with the situation. "It's some snot-nosed kid." "Well, get out there and get rid of him," ordered the blue man. The two criminals opened the side doors on the van only to have them immediately closed back on them by an unseen force from outside their vehicle. "What the?" Outside of the van, the teen who was holding the hitch looked up at his friend standing on the roof. "Are you ready up there?" he asked as his dark-haired friend directed some clouds in front of the van to not only cover the windshield but also to form a small ramp a few feet away. "Let it roll," said the cloud user as he leapt off the van, propelled by cloud boots. The larger teen did as instructed and released the hitch, causing the vehicle to lurch forward at high speed until its wheel came into contact with the ramp. The sudden shift in weight and position caused the van to topple over onto its side from the momentum and slide for several feet until it was stopped by a mass of clouds covering it. "Ow, what the heck?" screamed one of the villains. "Let us out of here," yelled one of the others. "You want out, you got it," said the cloud boy as he released the part of his quirk that was holding the door closed. The small gang of criminals slid the door open and burst out, only to be met with half a dozen men in black skin-tight suits with multiple eyes and gauntlet-like weapons known as cement guns pointed at their faces. Needless to say, the group surrendered quite quickly after that. "Man, I thought the dumb criminals only came out when All Might was still an acting hero," said the large teen known as Slade Mason. "You'd have to be low on the IQ scale or incredibly diabolically smart to even think something like this would be a good idea." "Depends on how you look at it," said the cloud user whose name was Clay Zero, now that All Might's retired the criminals who think they never had a shot before taking it. Turns out the one good idea they had was not committing a crime because they knew All Might was around. Well, these knuckleheads thought it was a good idea to commit a crime literally 2 blocks from Gang Orca's hero agency, Slade pointed out. "Villains may be coming out of the woodwork, but aside from a few exceptions, they ain't getting any smarter." "I couldn't agree more," said a large figure behind the two boys as they turned around to see a man whose head was that of an Orca's wearing a suit that seemed to denote him as a member of a crime family. "And good job on knowing when and how to exercise the authority of your provisional licenses." "Gang Orca, sir," both Slade and Clay said as they practically snapped to attention. "No need to be so formal. said the whale hero with a dismissive wave. It's good to see the two of you again. Tell me, what brings you up here so close to my agency? Well, it's like this, said Clay as he began to explain some of the events which brought them to the decision to do a work study. UA High School's Class 1A, a few days ago. To put it simply, the hero work studies are more advanced versions of the internships you did during the first semester, explained Aizawa as the class sat and listened. You'll not only help out pros on the streets but also take part in investigations. This matter was discussed at length with both the principal and your teachers, and we all reached the same consensus. It's just too soon and they should be cancelled immediately. It took a moment for their sensei's words to sink in, but when they did, the response was something else. "Wait!" exclaimed the entire class after hearing the news. "But we've already had meetings for them," said Kirishima in disbelief. "I mean, it makes sense to a degree when you consider why we had to move into the dorms in the first place," said Kaminari, surprisingly sounding somewhat smart for a change. The only one who seemed to be happy about this news was Bakugu, simply because he wouldn't be getting to do one anyway. "There have been some who think otherwise about such a protective outlook," continued Aizawa as if he hadn't heard a word, "which is why a compromise has been reached. For those who wish to take part in work studies, you'll be required to pick one with a good track record. Otherwise you won't be allowed to participate." "Damn it!" exclaimed Bakugu as he realized some would indeed get to do a work study while he couldn't. "So who are you going with?" questioned Clay as he looked over to his friend Midoriya. "Oh, me," said the green-haired boy as he was snapped out of his thoughts by the question. "Well, I tried calling Gran Torino to see if he'd take me on, but he said he was busy." "Ouch, that's tough," said Slade. "If you want, we could try and get you in with us at one of the agencies we're thinking about going to." "Actually, before he hung up, Gran Torino gave me a suggestion," said Midoriya. "He wants me to try All Might's old sidekick Sir Nighteye." "That guy," said Clay with a hint of surprise. "You probably already know this. But he's a bit on the stiff side, at least when he's out in public. From what I heard, he and All Might had something of a falling out, but don't take my word for it." "It's still a chance I need to take," replied Midoriya. "Sir Nighteye is one of the few heroes who actually worked directly under All Might, so he'll know how to help me improve my quirk." "Assuming he knows how it works in the first place," Slade pointed out. "Just because he was All Might's sidekick doesn't necessarily mean he helped him train. Add on to that, we don't even know if he'll accept you into a work study in the first place. With All Might introducing us, I don't see why he wouldn't," said Midoriya, "but it's the best way I can think of to get stronger in a short amount of time." "Well, whatever the case, I guess if you're that dead set on it, there's not much else we can say but good luck," said Clay as he crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat. "Thanks, guys," said Midoriya. "Oh, I've been meaning to ask, who have you picked for your work studies?" "Well, it's a bit of a long shot for us too, but after browsing the list of available pros approved by the school, we managed to narrow it down to about 2 or 3 possible matches, like Gang Orca and Kamui Woods," explained Slade. "Assuming Gang Orca's forgiven me for electrocuting him at the provisional license exam," commented Clay with a downcast expression. For whatever reason, this got a bit of a laugh out of the three of them as they exited the classroom for the day. That weekend, UA Heights Alliance. As planned, Midoriya went to see All Might in the faculty office as soon as class was over. But things didn't go quite as well as he'd hoped. The former #1 hero surprisingly refused to introduce Midoriya to Sir Nighteye. Apparently, he was actually one of the teachers who'd voted against the students going into the work studies in the first place, and he also believed his protege had enough of a workload with just hero school and working on his new shoot-style form of combat. Though it appeared the biggest reason he wouldn't introduce Midoriya himself was that he didn't want to see his former sidekick due to the falling out they'd had a few years prior. But as the saying goes, there was a silver lining behind All Might's refusal: the #1 student at UA, Mirio Togata. The strongest of the big three had been interning at Nighteye's agency for over a year now, and after a talk with All Might and Midoriya, he was more than willing to set up a meeting for the current holder of One for All. This just left one little detail to tie up the rest of the loose ends. "I really shouldn't have gotten up so early on a weekend," Clay groaned internally as he sat on the couch closest to the door, yawning as he remembered the conversation from earlier in the week. Flashback. A couple nights ago. "You want us to come with you to Nighteye's agency this weekend?" questioned Slade as he, Clay and Midoriya sat at one of the kitchen tables eating some of the Density Quirk users' extra ramen. If you guys aren't too busy, replied Midoriya, Mirio's gonna be there with me, but you guys have always been good at helping me keep calm for these sorts of things. And if you both come along, you might get the chance to work with All Might's former sidekick too, assuming he'll take all three of us. We are admittedly still looking for an agency to do our work studies at, said Clay between helpings of his food, but we've already got a meeting lined up for this weekend at Gang Orca's agency on Sunday. No guarantees obviously, but it's still worth a shot. That won't be a problem, said Midoriya. Mirio and I are meeting Sir Nighteye on Saturday, so you could both come along for that. I can't, said Slade as he pulled out some of his notes. I already agreed to help Momo with a group study session on Saturday. Though Clay doesn't have any plans as far as I know. Well, I wouldn't say I have no plans, explained the cloud user. I was just hoping to rest up a bit on Saturday and maybe get some training in. Hey Clay, called Mina excitedly as she walked in the door. Do you have anything in particular going on this weekend? Unfortunately, he replied quickly before turning back to his friend and whispering, what time is this meeting of yours exactly? And flashback. Yep, he was doing this to help a friend and to avoid Mina and Gyru. It wasn't that he disliked being around them, they'd just been strangely clingy ever since the provisional licensing exam had ended. With no huge tests to worry about or special training to endure, the pink girl had taken to tackling him in the hallway on occasion with a good morning hug, while the other, normally aloof girl would make an active effort to ensure Clay was aware of her presence. It was fine if it was one or the other at a time, but when both of them were in the same room the atmosphere seemed tense in a way. The cloud user himself had a couple of hunches on why they were suddenly behaving like this, but most of them seemed far-fetched, at least in his mind. Either way, he was here now reading up on their destination with his phone while waiting for Midoriya to show up so they could head over to Sir Nighteye's agency with Mirio. The only noises that were interrupting the peaceful atmosphere were the sounds of a recently awakened Kaminari and Mineta brushing their teeth while talking to Tokoyami and Kirishima near the kitchen. At least it was until a green blur came speeding past all of them, heading right for the door. Morning, called Midoriya as he passed Kaminari and the others. Let's go, Clay. I knew he was eager, but that's something else, thought the cloud user with a sigh as he got up and used one of his clouds to fly after his friend before he got too far away. The hero agency of Sir Nighteye. The ride over took an hour by train and required a bit of walking, but before long, the three found themselves standing in front of a moderately large office building with several windows that served as the headquarters for the pro hero. And here we are, said Mirio as he pointed to the entrance of the building. Sir should be in at this hour if he hasn't been called in for an emergency. And are you okay, man? The reason he asked was the green-haired boy he'd brought along was currently trembling quite visibly and seemed to not be breathing much. Well, I suppose I should give you credit for making it this far before freaking out a little, said Clay as he put a hand on his friend's shoulder. You've got nothing to worry about. Just loosen up a bit and treat this like a meeting with one of the teachers back at UA. But not too loose either, added Mirio with his usual laid-back demeanor. Sir is rather strict after all. Yeah, I've heard all about it, replied Midoriya as he broke out of his trance. He's actually famous for being demanding on others and himself. He possesses such a sharp gaze that I shiver just by seeing him on TV. Truthfully, he looks absolutely severe. Clay couldn't agree more with that assessment. The man's appearance itself wasn't anything too unique, as his hero costume consisted of a white suit with black shoes and a red tie. His short hair was green with yellow highlights and was neatly combed in a basic part one would expect from a businessman, and the glasses he wore only added to that image. What made him stick out among some of the other heroes was his intense gaze. That is all true, stated Mirio, but there's another side to the man that no one from the press ever gets to. See, does he have a thing for cats too? Questioned Clay, already certain this man would get along great with his Uncle Aizawa. Not exactly, replied Mirio. You see, the best way to get acknowledged by him at this meeting would be to make him laugh. Do that and he'll definitely approve of you. Well, shit, thought Clay as he tried to remember one time that Midoriya ever intentionally made him laugh and came up with nothing. What do you mean by make him laugh? Asked the green-haired boy. It's exactly what it sounds like, said Mirio as he opened the door and they began walking into the lobby, Despite him being so stern, he really values having a good sense of humor for some odd reason. I guess you could call it irony or something like that. Depends on what he likes to laugh at, commented Clay as they began trekking up a rather long spiral staircase. Well, whatever the case, the most I can do is introduce you to him, said Mirio. It's up to Sir to decide whether or not he wants you to intern here. So from here on out you'll need to think of a way to make him acknowledge you. I've been wondering something, said Midoriya as he gave voice to one of the thoughts that just occurred to him. Why did you decide to introduce me to Sir in the first place? Well, this is your dream, isn't it? Mirio questioned back, and right now you're fighting to make it a reality. But you've run into a bit of trouble in the form of getting a work study. So basically it's Heroing 101, which is to help out someone who's in trouble. That makes sense, and thank you for coming along too, Clay, replied Midoriya with a smile. No problem, replied the Cloud Wielder. Hero or not, one should always be willing to help out a friend in need. Conversation halted then as the group of 3 students arrived at a door at the end of a long hallway. And here we are, said the phase quirk user as he pointed at the door. Sir Nighteye is beyond this door, so if you intend to get stronger, all you need to do is walk through it. And don't worry too much about the intimidating gaze thing, said Clay. I grew up with an uncle that wields an eye quirk, so I'm used to that sort of thing. We'll be right behind ya if you happen to get tongue-tied. Thanks again, guys, said Midoriya with a look of determination as he walked towards the door and pushed it open forcefully. Whatever they'd been expecting to see, Sir Nighteye doing tickle torture on a blue girl wearing a white and blue costume with gold lines, a very visible midriff and a see-through gas mask was not it. What kind of agency is this? See, this is how loud and energetic you can get when you put your mind to it, said Sir Nighteye as he adjusted the setting on the vertical table he had the girl strapped to. The blue girl was currently laughing uncontrollably as a pair of what appeared to be pink cattails was being used to tickle her on each side. Mirio, what in the world is happening right now? Questioned Midoriya with a gaping expression. That's his sidekick Bubble Girl strapped to the tickle machine there, explained Mirio. It looks like she wasn't able to make him laugh. Should we come back later? Asked Clay. I'd hate to interrupt whatever FTSH torture he's got going on here. The chances of that happening dropped to 0 as the pro hero suddenly turned his intense gaze on all of them. Midoriya was understandably terrified while Clay instinctively tensed, just short of raising his guard. That look of his seems a bit more unnerving in person, admittedly, thought Clay as his eyes shifted to his green-haired friend. He didn't seem to want to move at first, but eventually he regained his composure and straightened his hair out a bit. Wait a sec, he's not really gonna try that, is he? Much to Clay and Mirio's horror, when Midoriya raised his head he was smiling. Or to be more precise, he was doing his best all-might face, and when he spoke it was his best imitation of the former pro's voice. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I am here to ask for a work study. Of all the jokes to pull out of your but you go with the all-might impersonation, thought the Cloud Wielder as he glanced at Mirio's own shocked expression. The two of them were likely thinking the same thing. Izuku Midoriya wasn't funny in the slightest at this moment. And just what is this display, boy? Demanded Nighteye as his eyes contorted in anger. Are you mocking the great All Might? In hindsight, thought Clay, maybe we should have gone over this whole laughing thing before coming here. It would make what happened next all the more complicated. Hero Office of Sir Nighteye, midday. Over the years Clay had learned that sometimes one had to rely on the slightly unconventional in order to overcome some obstacles. In the current case of his friend, Midoriya was attempting to make his possible recruiter laugh by using his very own all-might impression which he'd practiced and honed to the best of his ability over the years. Given that the pro hero Sir Nighteye was the former sidekick of All Might, Clay could see why he thought something like that might work. But judging by the look on the man's face, the plan had backfired horribly. You have some nerve doing that with your face, said Nighteye menacingly as he adjusted his glasses and stepped forward. Is this all some kind of joke to you? I thought that was the whole point? Mused Clay. Well, not exactly, said Midoriya, still doing his all-might voice as he took a step back. You would do such a blasphemous impersonation in front of the former sidekick of All Might, said Nighteye as he reached out suddenly. The location of All Might's wrinkles on your face are all wrong. Everyone in the room was understandably taken aback by this. In his earlier days, All Might's crow's feet were only 0.6 centimeters long. From the Silver Age onward, they were 0.8. Even unlicensed merchandise is able to have the correct wrinkles in the correct era these days, while you don't appear to even know that much. I never knew Midoriya could have a rival on who's the bigger All Might fan, thought Clay as he glanced around the man's square office, which was covered in memorabilia dedicated to the retired #1 hero. Cardboard cutouts, bookshelves filled to the brim with All Might factoids and magazines, and even a 10th anniversary poster that, if Clay recalled his friend's words correctly, had never been on sale to the public. I don't really care for this farce any longer, so you may see yourself out. Mirio, who's the other dash? The Vinegar River incident, Midoriya said suddenly, drawing the pro's attention. Are you aware of it, sir? It was when a middle schooler whose quirk changed the properties of water was drowning in a river until All Might swooped in and saved him. In the process, the drowning kid panicked and turned the river into vinegar that got into All Might's eyes. His face had a slightly different appearance that day. Probably because vinegar was burning the sheet out of his sockets, Clay almost said out loud before stopping himself. His smile and the way his eyes were narrowed at the time was the face I chose to impersonate earlier. Your preferred All Might face was him cringing in pain from vinegar in his eyes? Now the thought of that might actually make someone laugh. I remember this rescue, said Nighteye as he turned back towards them. It occurred before I teamed up with All Might, and I believe it was mentioned on a widely run television show titled A Look Back. I love that show, exclaimed Midoriya happily as he pumped both fists in the air. Many people say it was a boring save because there weren't any villains, but I really like it for some reason. My favorite part was the witty response he gave after the kid he rescued thanked him. I'm the one who should be thanking you, quoted Nighteye. My skin feels 10 years younger now. Yes, exactly, exclaimed Midoriya excitedly. It was a perfect one-liner. I see, so you were testing me then, were you? Said Nighteye with a raised eyebrow. Oh no, said the green-haired boy as he began waving his arms frantically. It's just that since All Might is a teacher at our school, I don't actually get to geek out that much about him. Could have fooled me, thought Clay as he tuned out the rest of the conversation and followed Mirio over to where Bubble Girl was currently restrained at. Who's that, Mirio? Groaned Bubble Girl as the two students undid the restraints and helped her down from the tickle machine. He's kind of loud. He's one of the underclassmen I brought from my school, explained Mirio in his usual cheerful voice. His name's Izuku Midoriya. And who's this guy then? She asked, seeming to notice Clay just now. Clay Zero, replied the UA student. I guess you could say I'm here for emotional support, among other things. Though that might not be necessary anymore. He failed miserably at making Sir laugh, noted Mirio as he watched the conversation, but he is still making a fairly good first impression. Let's hope he can keep it up, thought Clay as Sir Nighteye took a seat behind his desk. So you're hoping to do a work study with my agency, interesting, said the pro as he twiddled his fingers on his desk. You believe doing so will make you stronger somehow? Yes, sir, so please allow me to do one here. Midoriya almost begged. We'll of course need to draw up a cont dash, Nighteye started to say before Midoriya reached into the backpack he'd brought with him. I've got one right here actually, said the green-haired boy as he rummaged around in the yellow bag he'd brought with him. You will also not interrupt me while I'm speaking, said the pro, prompting a quick apology from the UA student. Now once I stamp this document, you shall officially be employed by my agency for a work study. These won't be like the week-long internships you took on so casually. You're required to work here a minimum of 4 months, and while you will receive wages, your own academic responsibilities will no doubt suffer due to frequent absences. Your other classmates will very likely pull ahead of you during this time. I do realize that, said Midoriya, but I'll never make it to #1 as a hero if I worry about what everyone else is doing. Nighteye's reaction to this was to stamp the space right next to the contract on his desk. Sir, I think you missed. I missed because I have no intention of approving this, said the pro as he began tapping the stamp on his desk over and over again. I understand how my agency will prove beneficial to you, but what benefit will you bring to my agency? Currently this office runs rather smoothly with 2 sidekicks and a single work study in my employ, so why should I add you? What can you contribute to this agency and to society? If your intention is to be acknowledged, then you must be able to answer such questions as these unequivocally. All Might showed his worth by using his power and humor to give hope to those living in fear of criminals, which is why the world acknowledged him. You're right, said Midoriya with a tone of realization. I do have to figure out how I can best help the world. Then show me what you can do, said Sir Nighteye as he stood up from his desk, with your actions and not just words. And you standing in the corner over there, do you also intend to do a work study at this agency? Given that I walked in on a grown but man tickle torturing his sidekick to death, replied Clay with a shrug, I'm of the opinion that working here would be about as enjoyable as a sandpaper dildy. You don't have one of those lurking around here with the tickle machine, do you? Interesting, said Nighteye with a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth. You actually seem to possess a bit of humor within you. Well, if you change your mind, you can try this test after your friend. What you need to do is take this seal from me within 3 minutes and stamp the contract yourself. So you mean you're really, Midoriya said with a hopeful expression. I'm giving you a chance to work at my agency even though you don't possess an ounce of humor in your body, said Nighteye. As for you three, leave the room for now and wait outside. Sir, yes sir, said Mirio and Bubble Girl while Clay simply nodded. Once more with some feeling, declared Nighteye. Yes, repeated the sidekick and work study with a salute before exiting the room with the U8's student right behind them. The trio walked down the hall for a few seconds before Bubble Girl spoke up. So did you have to do a practical interview to get into the agency? Questioned Bubble Girl. Not really, said Mirio as he ran a hand through his hair. Sir asked specifically for me, so I didn't need to jump through any hoops to get my spot here. Wow, must be nice to be his golden boy, commented Bubble Girl as the UH student let out a laugh. And I can't believe I'm actually jealous of a high schooler. Speaking of which, what's your story, Ciro was it? As I mentioned before, I was mostly here to help Midoriya in case his nerves got the better of him, explained Clay. He's one of my oldest friends, so I know how to calm him down when necessary. Even despite some of the crazy stuff we've been through since starting hero school, he still chokes up on high-pressure presentations like this. Well, I'm impressed you almost got Sir to smile, said Mirio. Most people don't talk to him the way you just did. Like I said while I was in his office, I don't plan on doing a work study here, said Clay, so I've got no reason to be terribly formal. As for my humor, I get it from my parents. They're actually very experienced in dealing with a stoic guy like that. Any tips on how to make it flow naturally? Questioned Bubble Girl. Just don't think too hard about it and speak your mind, I guess, replied Clay as he leaned against the wall next to a vending machine while Mirio ordered a drink from it. Bubble Girl took a seat on the bench next to the machine. Truthfully, it's a lot like anything else. The more you do it, the better at it you get. And I've bantered with some interesting people over the years. The sound of a large thump on the other side of the wall alerted them to what was currently happening in Nighteye's office. Midoriya was leaping around the room desperately trying to snatch the seal from him. So far without success. Wow, Sir is really stringing that poor kid along, noted Bubble Girl. I know, right, he's definitely serious about this, said Mirio with his usual happy face. If I recall correctly, said Clay, Sir Nighteye's quirk allows him to see into someone's future when certain conditions have been met. It lasts for about an hour, which'll be far more time than he actually needs. Right on the money, said Mirio. Specifically, he can see the choices someone will make, basically knowing their every move. Spectacular, said Clay with a sigh, but since we're discussing the man, I got something of a question. Why did he ask for you specifically? From what you told me and Class 1A, your skills didn't develop to the degree they are now until after you gained experience from your work study. Oh, that, said Mirio. Who knows, honestly? I guess he just saw my potential with his quirk or something. Right, said Clay as a final resounding bang was heard on the other side of the wall. Well, that sounds like our cue to head back in, said Mirio as he and Bubble Girl hastily rushed back to Nighteye's office and burst through the door somewhat excitedly. Cue our totally well-timed return. You are done, right? Questioned Bubble Girl, because that was a pretty loud and decisive bang on the wall just now. In fact, as Clay looked around, he noted a red trail of blood on the far wall near the 10th anniversary poster, while the rest of the walls and even the ceiling had footprints on them. Add on to that some of the books and papers scattered about, and it looked like a proper fight had indeed just occurred, with a surprising result. "I'll take the boy Mirio," said Sir Nighteye as he moved his gaze from Midoriya, who was currently on the floor, to the entering trio. "Awesome," cheered Mirio and Clay before he could stop himself. "What? But I wasn't able to accomplish either of the things you asked me to do?" said a confused Midoriya from his position on the floor. "I told you to take the seal from me and stamp the contract within 3 minutes, however," said Nighteye. "I did not say you'd be rejected if you happened to fail these objectives." "I guess that means you managed to make him laugh after all," said Mirio as Clay helped his friend up from the floor. "Truthfully, I'd already decided I was taking you on the moment I heard you were coming here," explained the pro hero as he picked up the contract. "I was aware you weren't entirely lacking in skill and intellect, but I still had to see it for myself. You see, with the symbol of peace gone, the people need a light that is not dim but dazzling. You'll come to see as you work here alongside professionals that despite All Might's mandate, you are not worthy of his power." He dropped the seal in Midoriya's hand and set the contract down in front of him while letting his words sink in. "So this prick's whole plan is to make Midoriya give up," thought Clay, and given how he said Midoriya wasn't worthy of his power, he knows about One for All. It makes a lot more sense now. He took on Mirio because he believes he should be the true successor to All Might. The same line of thinking was probably going through his friend's head as he gazed at the seal in his hand. But the Midoriya Clay knew was not the type to give up easily, and as he stamped the contract in front of him, the Cloud user could tell he was going to do everything in his power to prove Sir Nighteye wrong. UA Heights Alliance, that night. "Congratulations on finding an agency, Deku," complimented Uraraka as she, Midoriya, Clay, Slade and few other members of Class 1A sat around on the couches in their night clothes. Everyone else was quick to give their congratulations, and Ida even shook Midoriya's hand. "Thanks a lot, guys," replied the One for All holder with a smile. "We should be thanking you really," said Ida as he tipped his glasses. "You're an inspiration for all of us." "I'm wondering how the rest of us are supposed to compete with that," said Kaminari as he and some of the other boys of Class 1A approached. "I mean Sir Nighteye's agency with a personal recommendation from Mirio. I heard Clay here was even offered a possible position too," said Zero. "Did you really make the guy laugh?" Like I explained to Slade and the others before a few certain people exaggerated it, Clay glanced at Mina. He quirked his mouth into an almost smirk and said I possessed humor. Anyone who hangs around me for more than 5 minutes could have told him that. "It's still pretty impressive on both your parts," said Sato. "I honestly don't know what's more unbelievable. Midoriya getting the work study or Clay turning it down." "You'd understand if you saw Bubble Girl when she was strapped to a tickling machine," said Clay. "If I'm gonna laugh about something, it'll be because I want to. After all, forced comedy isn't quite as funny as comedy that comes out naturally." "I just wish I could find a work study," pouted Uraraka as she held her head up with her hands. "The school won't let me go with Gunhead's agency because he hasn't had enough interns." "I've had the same problem trying to go with Selkie's internship," said Tsuyu. "I can't even apply for Fourth Kind's agency because he doesn't take students for work studies," groaned Kirishima as he slumped over on the back of the couch. "Are you having any luck getting past the requirements, Slade?" asked Zero. "Because a whole lot of places are already ruled out for us." "Clay and I actually have a meeting set up with Gang Orca for tomorrow," replied the density shifter. "With any luck it should go at least somewhat favorably." "I guess I should have expected you two to be on top of it," groaned Kaminari. "Well, it makes sense to a fair degree given that we're directly involved with hero work," said Shoji. "If anything happened, then it would be the pros who have to take responsibility for it," Aizawa said as everyone wondered how long he'd been standing by the door. "Only the best pros will take on rookies such as yourselves knowing the risks involved. Speaking of which, Tokoyami, you've actually gotten an offer from Hawks in Kyushu." "No way," said Zero. "That guy's the number 3 hero." Indeed, if what Clay heard was true about the winged hero, he knew his stuff. "I humbly accept his offer," said Tokoyami with a nod of his bird head. "Just let me know when you plan to head there so I can sign off on your absences," said Aizawa. "Also, Kirishima, Amajiki of the Big 3 wants to discuss a few things with you. Uraraka and Azui, Nijire Hato wants to talk to you too. Track them down tomorrow or whenever you have time." That's all for now. The 1A teacher turned and exited the room then as a new level of excitement began to permeate the atmosphere. What in the world would Amajiki want with me? Questioned Kirishima. It might have to do with the work studies if you consider the timing of it all, said Tsuyu. No way that'd be too good to be true, right? Said Uraraka as her head shot up. And we gotta wait till— Nope, I can't wait, said Kirishima as he stood up straight. I'm heading over to the third-year dorms right now. Same here, let's go Ochako, said Tsuyu as the two of them got up and almost rushed out the door. And now I'm jealous of even more of our classmates, groaned Kaminari. Who cares about that work-study stuff anyway, Mineta chimed in. First years like us will probably get stuck with busy work like running errands and cleaning and doing the paperwork all day. You mean like what happened at your internship? Quipped Kaminari. Don't remind me of my disgraceful past, exclaimed Mineta. Which part? Questioned Slade. There's a lot to choose from in that bundle. If the rest of the class wasn't laughing before, they certainly were now. The next day, Gang Orca's hero office. Now Clay and Slade weren't really nervous when they went to the interview with Gang Orca's agency, but even they had to admit that helping stop a robbery definitely upped their chances as the two of them stood in the large main office of the Whale Hero. I must admit I have little reason not to contract you both with my agency right now given your record of accomplishments, said Gang Orca, but I feel I should at least ask one important question. Why is it the two of you want to be heroes in the first place? It was a question the duo had expected as it had been asked of them many times before at UA, and each time the answer seemed a little different. But they did have an answer. My two best friends are fighting to become heroes, said Slade. For a long while that was more than enough of a reason for me to keep pushing through, so I could stand beside them in their struggles to make this world better. But on a more personal level, I want to be a hero because it affords me the chance to solve problems facing us that I wouldn't have the authority to do so otherwise. I want to be a hero because there are some things that only heroes can do. Gang Orca seemed to accept this answer as he turned his attention to Clay. Well, my reasoning isn't as fantastic as all that, said the cloud user. I want to be a hero so that I can fight back against those who dwell in the dark and, now that All Might's retired, help prevent the re-emergence of organized crime by routing out those in the criminal underworld. Good enough for now at least, said Gang Orca as he stamped both of their contracts with a seal of approval, and funny you should mention organized crime. We happen to be doing a low-key investigation of an organization known as the Shai Hasaikai. The former Yakuza, said Clay with a quirk of his eyebrow. From what he remembered, the breaking up of most forms of organized crime left their thugs basically wandering around aimlessly taking what villainous work they could get. Though given that the authorities knew who they were and monitored their movements, there was very little they should have been able to actually get away with. The very same, said Gang Orca as he pulled out a file which had a picture of a man wearing a red plague mask that resembled a bird's beak. The group's head and second in command, Kai Chisaki, has been acting rather off lately. He's been actively gathering the crime group back together again, and word has it he's even made contact with the League of Villains, a group I'm certain the two of you are more than familiar with. We've had more than a few run-ins with those pricks, said Slade as he clenched his fist a little. Do you want us to help identify some of them? Not quite, said Gang Orca as he held up another file. We'll be patrolling an area where some of his subordinates have been seen recently. Now I know the two of you are capable of holding your own when push comes to shove, but this is mainly a recon mission, so do your best to avoid confrontation. What should we do if we notice something off the patrol route that looks like it's worth investigating? Questioned Clay as he looked at the map in the files. Contact me if you can and I'll decide whether or not it's worth looking into, replied the Whale Hero. That said, should either of you find yourselves in a situation where you can't reach me, you'll have to use your own judgment on how to proceed. Do the two of you think you can handle something like that? Yes, sir, said the UA students excitedly as they did their own little salutes. That's what I like to hear, said Gang Orca with what passed for a smile on his whale face. So, starting today, is your first work-study assignment with my agency. It wasn't often Clay's nerves got the better of him these days. Between escaping a burning oil tanker, multiple villain encounters, and seeing the granddaddy of all bad guys, all for one, in the flesh, he was really chipping down the number of things which actually scared him. But even he had to admit that it was a little nerve-wracking going on an actual patrol near an area with known or at least suspected criminal activity. Thankfully his mask hid most of his face, so no one would be able to tell right away that he was the slightest bit nervous unless they were observant enough to notice his occasional fidgeting with his costume. Slade wasn't doing much better as Clay noticed him clenching and unclenching his fists every now and then, one of the telltale signs he'd come to recognize as his big friend actually being antsy. The only person to not seem overly nervous was the aptly named Sergeant Seal, who wore the same outfit as the rest of Gang Orca's men but had to have it accommodated to fit his half-sea lion head. "I know investigating is a bit new to the both of you, but don't get too nervous," said Seal with his voice slightly distorted by the mask. "Just relax and keep an eye out for anything unusual. After all, the main investigation is being handled by Gang Orca himself. I get that we're just looking around the perimeter a block away from the actual investigation," said Clay, "but I don't think you realize just how bad our luck has been since our hero training started. It's been villain attack after villain attack, and that's not counting the insane tests we've been through up to this point," said Slade. "One of the few upsides has been that random people wave at us from time to time because they recognize us from the sports festival. As if on cue, a few people from across the street did just that while also letting out a few cheers. What did I tell you? And given that the both of you were able to pull through each time just adds to the fact that you shouldn't feel so nervous about patrolling," said Seal as the trio turned a corner and walked down a more deserted side street. "What you need to do now is be taking note of things like possible out-of-place noises, behaviors, and sights. Ask yourself, does this seem out of place, or is that supposed to be here, or why is that guy ducking down an alley?" "You mean that guy?" questioned Slade as he pointed out an individual in a green hoodie who was indeed performing that very action. "You guessed it," said Seal as his voice took on a more businesslike tone. His movements became a bit more tense as conversation dropped to a minimum. The group slowly crept forward and peered into the alley to get a look at what was occurring. Their target seemed to be a bit fidgety as his head darted from side to side, looking around the alley until a voice startled him. In the next moment, a short figure wearing a black outfit with a white bird mask came treading into view as the sidekick and two work-studies strained their ears to listen to what was being said. "You're back earlier than expected this week," said the smaller figure. "I told you not to waste the merchandise so quickly." "I ran into a sidekick. What was I supposed to do?" said the man in the green hoodie. "I had to use them or I would have been caught." "You assured the boss you wouldn't draw any unwanted attention," said the smaller figure. "Tell me you at least hid the fact that you used the drag." "I did, I swear," said the hooded man. "For all they know I just went ballistic with my quirk. I wouldn't be that careless with something so important." "And yet you allowed yourself to be followed," said the masked midget as his gaze turned towards the entrance of the alley where the trio was currently standing. "Rikia, if you wouldn't mind taking out the garbage?" The wall in front of him burst forth then as a massive hand with an armored glove reached out and yanked the frightened criminal in the green hoodie through the wall. "Damn it, they're getting away," said Seal as he, Clay, and Slade all rushed forward down the alley towards their target. The small man in the black cloak seemed to be in no hurry as a massive shadow emerged from the hole in the wall. Clit was quick to send out a cloud twice the size of a marble that sped towards the two unknown villains. The one blocking their way wasn't fast enough to stop the high-speed projectile as it impacted on the back of the midget's head, causing him to fall over unconscious. This victory, though small, enraged their new enemy as he threw a massive punch towards the three of them. Slade increased to max density to block the blow while Clay flew over his head using his cloud greaves and gauntlets, leaving Seal to leap up and attempt a punch of his own against the behemoth. But the large man was surprisingly quick for his size as he backed up and caught Seal's arm before throwing him against the wall. His next blow was stopped, however, as several crescent blade clouds cut at the skin of his joints. The muscular giant grew annoyed as he turned his head towards Clay, who could now see he was wearing a bird mask with black coloration that resembled a crow's head. As he pegged back his fist for another blow, Slade came jumping up from behind him, grabbing his head while also increasing his density. "Try some Aikido, prick," exclaimed the UA student as he swung his quickly increasing weight to the side, knocking their opponent off balance and causing him to fall to the ground with an impact that cracked the concrete beneath him. Seal was also back on his feet as he came in with a flying axe kick on the giant's black, tank-topped stomach. "Annoying little flies," murmured the bird-masked man as he shot back up, forcing Seal off of him before aiming a kick at Slade, who was sent skidding back despite raising his density in time. Clay was next as he dropped down on the giant's head, covering it with a mass of thickened clouds. The villain stumbled around as he tried to free his head, each success meeting only with the clouds reforming back on his head as the wielder held on for dear life. "Slade, over," called out Clay as he produced a rope from the cloud sack on his opponent's head. "I love this one," exclaimed Slade as he grabbed onto the rope and swung between their foe's legs while upping his density. Clay jumped off of the villain as the force of Slade's high-density swing yanked his head downwards into the pavement before flipping his body forward onto his back. "The bigger they are and all that," said Seal as he pulled out and fired his own personal cement guns at the villain's feet and legs. The quickly hardening residue formed a layer of stone over his limbs as he appeared to struggle at grasping the situation. Or so they all thought until something strange happened. A loud inhaling noise sounded from the giant as some kind of essence seemed to be pulled from Slade and Seal, both of whom collapsed to their knees. "Guys, what's wrong?" asked Clay as he tried to help up his friend. "Their vitality now belongs to me," said the villain before shattering the restraining cement on his feet, causing debris to rain down on them and make Clay lose his concentration on the cloud that was holding his head. "And it has made me ever stronger." His point was clear as his already bulging muscles expanded even more and his height seemed to increase by more than a foot as he flexed his large, combat-gloved hands. "Your creative teamwork isn't half bad, but what will you do now that you're fighting more or less alone?" It was true, both Seal and Slade were having trouble standing right now, while Clay's own normal attacks were ineffective against a thick-skinned opponent. Ordinarily he'd have slayed by him a little time so he could charge up a higher-powered version of Grasping Thunder, but he couldn't do that and protect his friends at the same time. There were only a few options he could see now, and Clay chose the one that would benefit at least a little as he produced a massive cloud which filled up the alley and charged toward the villain. The man named Rikia seemed unconcerned as he ped his fist back and threw a full power swing which met some resistance, but not enough to stop him as he felt his hand break through and make contact with the ground. But the sound of splintering bone and squished flesh did not reach his ears. Looking around, the Yakuza member noted that his prey was nowhere to be seen. Even more infuriating, neither was the body of the bird-masked midget. Near Gang Orca's hero agency. The supposedly dissipated cloud drifted to the ground until it dissolved completely, revealing a less exhausted Slade and Seal while Clay himself was busy catching his breath. "Who was that guy?" asked the density shifter as he experimentally flexed his hand. It seemed their strength was slowly returning, thankfully, but it still left the question of how it had been drained in the first place. "Rikia Katsukame," replied Seal, a member of the Shai Hasaikai's 8 expendables. "They work for Kai Chisaki? Or to be more precise, the group is pretty much devoted to him. I wish I knew why he was hanging around that particular area in the first place though. Maybe this will shed a little light on things," said Clay as he pointed to an empty black cloak and mask. "I managed to grab onto the short guy with my clouds, but there doesn't seem to be a physical body in there. The guy must have escaped with his quirk somehow. But we're not empty-handed," noted Slade as he rummaged around in the cloak and pulled out what appeared to be some kind of drag injector. "I think Gang Orca will definitely want to take a look at this." Analysis lab in Gang Orca's hero office. A short time later. "I must say I'm actually a bit impressed," said the pro as he read through the report. "You encountered one of the Shai Hasaikai and still managed to grab some evidence in the middle of escaping. Though in hindsight perhaps I should have tagged along with the two of you on your first patrol to make sure things went smoothly." "Well, hindsight is 20/20 anyway," said Clay. "None of us could have predicted what was going to happen, and the fact that we escaped at all is still amazing to me, honestly." "Speaking of amazing, did we learn anything about that Rikia guy's quirk?" "From what you told me, he appears to absorb vitality," mused Gang Orca, "but he either needs to make physical contact first or he can only absorb the vitality of so many people at once. It would explain why you were unaffected, Mr. Zero." "And the drags we recovered?" questioned Slade. "Have your guys been able to determine what sort of effects they're supposed to have on someone?" "By the looks of the preliminary analysis, replied Gang Orca as he flipped to the next page of the report. The drags appear to be capable of enhancing one's quirk to incredible levels and, in theory, even allow the surpassing of certain limitations one would normally have in the use of their quirk. So that's the Shy Hasaikai's game, said Clay as he adopted a thinking pose. Sell drags to petty criminals with small quirks to beef them up and rake in some dough while also using said drags to strengthen their own, more powerful quirks to spread their influence throughout the city once again. A possible scenario to be sure, said Gang Orca, though with this small amount of information it's too soon to be making broad assumptions just yet. The next thing we need to know is if Kai Chisaki is connected to any of this or if his subordinates are acting of their own accord. We also need to determine the source of these new drags, as it's still possible the Shy Hasaikai are merely the middlemen for another organization, especially given the recent reports that they might be teaming up with the League of Villains. So what should our next step be? Asked Slade. Should we head back out on the street? You two have done plenty of work for today, said Gang Orca. I need to make a few calls to some other agencies who are also doing an investigation into Kai Chisaki and his group. So for now just head home and come in at the next appointed time. We should have something for the both of you by then. Yes, sir, they both replied politely before turning and heading out the door. As soon as they walked out the door, though, their minds started working in overdrive. It made the walk out of the agency relatively quiet as the both of them were lost in thought. Their stroll down the street and to the train station was also fairly quiet, until Slade saw his friend eyeing one of the stops on the train schedule. You aren't really thinking of doing what I think you are you? Questioned Slade. We have a potential source that the other hero agencies don't, said Clay, and if the possibility exists that the Yakuza might be trying to rise from the ashes, then it would make sense that he'd at least hear about it to some extent. Yes, but if anyone we know catches us going in there again we could get expelled from school, said Slade. It's already difficult with Momo and Jiru knowing about it. Those two discovering us was a complete accident, assured Clay, and besides, can they really get mad at us if we bring in solid evidence on a group like the Shy Hasaikai? The obvious answer was yes. The teachers at UA could still get mad about them obtaining information this way. But at the same time, the possibility of gaining valuable intel that would help the hero community seemed like it would be worth at least a little risk, and the chances of them getting into a potential confrontation with an unknown enemy were also lower. The density shifter turned the idea over in his head every which way before finally sighing. Let's just get in and out this time, he said. As much as I like pool, betting our lives on it takes some of the fun out of it. Glad we're in agreement, said Clay as the two of them stepped onto the train. A short train ride later, the 8-ball knuckles. I gotta admit, said the massive ex-villain as he adjusted his pool cue, I didn't expect to be seeing either of you again after last time, or at least not this year anyway. He then proceeded to break the current formation of pool ball and came up with stripes as one fell in a side pocket. But at least you showed up before opening this time. We figured after the mishap that was our first visit it'd be better if we didn't show up when this place was full of possible villains, said Clay. I honestly wasn't even sure you'd let us in despite that. Ditto, said Slade as he got his turn and managed to sink one of the solid pool ball with a skillful push of his cue. The two of them had switched over to their street clothes and kept the hoods up on their jackets in order to look as seedy as possible on the way over to the now familiar villain's bar. Well, truth be told, it's been forever since I've had a good opponent for this game, replied 8-ball. A bunch of the punks that come in these days don't have the patience or skill to play but love to talk it up with their own excuses. Sore losers, the lot of them. In all honesty, a lot of villains are sore losers, Clay pointed out, so it shouldn't really be a surprise. It's not, admitted 8-ball, but there seemed to be more respect for good sport when I first opened this place. Anyway, what can I do for the both of you this time? Shy Hasaikai, said the Cloud Wielder. We encountered one of them earlier today who was selling some kind of quirk enhancement drag, as well as a huge guy wearing a bird mask. Katsukame, mused 8-ball as he actually missed his next shot. I remember tangling with him once over a territory dispute. Packs quite a punch, but the real kicker is when his quirk activates and steals the vitality of anyone he makes physical contact with. So that is how it works, commented Slade as he managed to knock another solid ball close to a side pocket. As for the drags, it's Shy Hasaikai alright, continued 8-Ball, but they've got something else they tried selling me recently too. Specialized bullets of some sort. Not sure what's in them, but they claim it'll put down the quirk of anyone I've got a beef with. Do you happen to have Annie with you right now? Questioned Clay. Guns don't really do me any good, replied 8-Ball as he managed to sink another striped ball in a side pocket. My hands are too big for most conventional firearms and I prefer punching out my problems with fisticuffs anyway. But there is one thing I've realized after doing a little figuring. And that would be, said Slade as he sank one of his own colored pool ball in a far end pocket. Only a few of the patrons coming in here have mentioned the bullets or the drags, explained 8-Ball, which tells me his supply ain't huge right now. If that's the case, he may only have 1 or 2 sources for the both of them right now. If you can find that, you might be able to shut down the whole operation before it even takes off. Sounds like a fairly straightforward plan, said Slade as he observed 8-Ball scoring another point. On paper, said the ex-villain, but they don't call these guys the Shai Hasaikai, the 8 precepts of death, for nothing. If you kids are really dead set on going after them, you'd best be ready for just that, a fight to the death. As if to stress how dangerous it really was, the bar owner sank the 8-Ball and ended the current game. The 2 students left the bar with just as many questions as answers that day, and a feeling of foreboding as their first day of work studies came to an end. UA Heights Alliance, nighttime. It had been a few days since the beginning of Clay and Slade's work study with Gang Orca, and so far the pair had only been called in one other time where they managed to help catch a small group of thugs with the same quirk enhancement drag they'd gotten off of the bird-masked midget. They'd come to learn his name was apparently Mimic and his quirk, mimicry, was the reason his costume was empty when they'd examined it. What was more alarming, however, was something the both of them had heard from Midoriya. The leader of the Shai Hasaikai, Kai Chisaki, had a daughter he'd run into while out on patrol with Mirio. From what he'd been told, the little blue-haired girl with a horn on her head was trembling and had bandages wrapped around her arms. The sight of it had been bothering Izuku for days, which made Clay and Slade a lot less willing to tell him what they'd both come to conclude. The girl was the source of either the anti-quirk bullet, the quirk enhancement drag, or both. In fact, the reason Clay was currently having trouble concentrating on the keyboard was because he was trying to think of whether or not he should actually tell Midoriya this fact. "Hey Clay, are you okay in there?" "Huh," said the cloud user as he stopped playing and looked up. "You were starting to rush your notes quite a bit," said Jairu from her position on the bench next to him. "You usually only do that when something's bothering you?" "I guess it would be obvious when one lets their emotions flow into their music," said Clay as he rubbed his head for a moment. "But how do you know that rushing notes is my way of saying something's wrong? Maybe I'm really excited and can't contain myself." "You tend to play a bit more upbeat when you're excited," countered Jairu, "and by that I mean you put more emphasis on certain notes while also having a better flow. But your playing starts to get choppy and slowly picks up speed when you're focused on something else. You really did grow up with music your whole life if you can spot that," said Clay, mildly impressed, "though it does make me wonder how closely you're paying attention to me to notice such a minute detail." "Oh, I'm not paying that close of attention," said Jairu as she looked away with a slight blush while her earphone jacks pressed together in the same manner as a person's fingers. "I just happened to notice because, you know, my quirk is good with hearing things and I've got a musical ear and dashed. Relax, I'm just teasing," said Clay, "but you are right, I've got a couple things on my mind from the work studies." "You know you can tell me stuff, right?" said Jairu. "After all, I kinda know at least one of your current dirty secrets already." "What would you say if I said I went back to that shady little villain's bar?" asked Clay. "Well, given that this is just hypothetical, I'd say you're still crazy for going back to a place that we only got out of because Slade's a good pool player," replied Jairu. She would have laughed a little too until she noticed that Clay was being serious. "You didn't dash?" Her door burst open then as Momo came dragging Slade in behind her. "Jairu, I think we need to have a talk with these two," said Momo with a stern look on her face. "You led with the bar too, didn't you?" Clay asked as his friend simply nodded. "You both went back to that place," whispered Jairu fiercely, remembering at the last second to keep her voice down as she closed and locked her door. "Well, as I was saying before, Momo dragged me all the way here," explained Slade. "We went there before business hours, so it was just 8-Ball and some employees." "But you still went back to a bar where villains are known to hang out," said Momo. After what happened last time, how could you even think it was a good idea risking expulsion for a second time? What possible reason could you have for that? To learn where a type of quirk enhancement drags are being made, said Clay. That was the original intent. We wound up learning much more than that. Like what? Questioned Jiru with her arms crossed. The Yakuza group known as the Shai Hasaikai are also producing anti-quirk bullets, said Slade, and now we believe their source for all of it is a little girl. This gave their two classmates pause as the both of them digested this information. Thanks to 8-Ball, we know almost for a fact that they're the ones behind it all, Clay explained further, but it was Midoriya who discovered the little girl. The decision we've been wrestling with this whole time is whether or not we should tell him our conclusions about her. Neither one of the girls spoke as Momo covered her mouth in shock while Jiru clenched one of her fists, realizing what it was they were implying. Someone is using a little girl to make drags and specialized bullets, repeated Momo. Why would someone do such a thing? The same reason villains always do something like that, said Slade, because they believe it'll give them power. What's more, the League of Villains may be working with the Shai Hasaikai. BS Herdes, said Jiru. Even with their boss out of commission, they still want to start trouble. But if they're working together, wouldn't that make the both of you targets? Momo pointed out. You were supposed to be on a list of people the League wanted killed on sight, Clay. There's no solid evidence to link the two yet, said Clay, but even if there wasn't, I won't be backing down from this case. But if the League is working with this Yakuza group, then you too might be targeted for helping with the investigation, said Jiru. What if they come after you directly? It would be no different than if we were actual pros, said Slade with his arms crossed. Maybe you've forgotten, but we are training to be heroes and, despite everything the teachers have done to ensure our safety, there still remains one undeniable fact. If we're serious about becoming heroes, then we have to be willing to risk our lives at some point. Jiru and Momo both wanted to argue this point, but instead they sighed upon realizing the two of them were right. The 1A students had already risked their lives multiple times due to the circumstances, but in truth, that was the life all of them were eventually going to lead if they managed to graduate. But this is all beside the point, said Clay. Like I said earlier, the real thing that's bothering me and Slade is whether or not we should tell Izuku about the girl. He's already pretty beat up about letting her go in the first place. But he still has a chance to save her, right? Asked Momo, somewhat quietly at first. If what we suspect is true, then the girl is being held captive for her quirk, said Slade with a hand to his chin, which means yes, there is a chance to save her. Then tell him that much at least, said Joe. You guys are friends after all. I don't know Midoriya very well, but I know you two have always been there to help him out when you could. And I know you both meant well going back to that place even if it could have gotten you in trouble. Just, please be careful when you do finally move in to save that girl. Clay and Slade nodded at their friend's request as Momo clapped her hands together. Well then, we still have some studying and some music playing to get to, Momo said happily. Why don't we pick up where we left off and have a jam session? A cheer was her answer as the four friends spent the rest of the time alternating between different instruments, happy that they were able to come to an understanding. Nighteye's agency, the next day. The UA students received a call to their work studies that morning and were currently on the train to the requested location. What was rather odd this time around, however, was the presence of a few more of their classmates. Midoriya, Kirishima, Uraraka and Tsuyu were all aboard and heading to the same station. It made for a much more pleasant trip to their destination, but it struck everyone as strange, especially when they exited the train and all headed in the same direction. No one commented much on the strangeness of the route at first. But as the group continued to walk with none of the students breaking off or deviating from the path being taken, Slade finally put two and two together and decided to speak up about it. So we're all going to the same place then, aren't we? He said. Now there's no proof of that just yet, said Kirishima. I mean, sure, we got on the same train, went to the same stop and have been walking basically the same route the whole way dashed. The red-haired teen trailed off as he realized what he was saying. I've actually been this way before, said Clay. I came up here with Midoriya and Mirio for the work-study interview with Sir Nighteye. This would be where his agency is located. But why would we all be meeting at the same agency? Asked Uraraka. Maybe they know, said Tsuyu as she pointed at said agency building where UA's big three were currently gathered. No way, said Midoriya as their group followed them inside where they were greeted by a rather amazing and unnerving sight. What's going on? The agency lobby was currently filled to the brim with pro heroes, both major and minor, all standing around chatting. Some of them were quite well known to the students there, including a certain night-walking teacher. So this is what you were called in at the last minute for, said Clay as he approached Aizawa, who was currently talking with Gran Torino and Bubble Girl. That's right, said his uncle, and I imagine like me you've got a pretty rough idea as to why we're all here at the moment. You could say that, replied Slade as another hero came walking up to them. She was a woman with short blonde hair wearing a type of headband with a bony mask that covered her right eye and was also decorated with small dragon wings that seemed to pop out of the back of her head. She wore a type of red, Japanese-style dress with a dragon design running along the edges. This was the dragon hero Ryukyu. I believe you girls should also recall me mentioning that you'd be helping out in a new case, said the dragon woman. Realization seemed to cross both Tsuyu and Uraraka's faces as they realized what she was talking about. The woman then turned to a familiar man in a white business suit. Everyone's here and accounted for Nighteye, we're ready to begin. First off, said All Might's former sidekick as he walked to the center of the room, I'd like to thank all of you for the information you've provided thus far. With it we've been able to break quite a bit of ground on our investigation. You've all been invited here today so that we can compare the information we have on the Yakuza group, Shai Hasaikai, and what they might be planning. The tension in the room rose a bit for many people, save for Kirishima who had to be brought up to speed on who they were talking about. Shortly after Nighteye's declaration, the large group of pros and students moved into the meeting room which had a rather large table and a projector screen at the far end. Nighteye himself sat at the head of the table as Bubble Girl began the explanation as to what led to the current investigation. Now starting from the beginning, she said while reading off of some notes from a clipboard, a group known as the Reservoir Dogs had a car accident involving the Shai Hasaikai. But a number of details didn't really add up, so Centipeder here began tailing them. It was at this point that a man wearing what resembled a butler's uniform with a centipede head took over the explanation, with a surprisingly high-pitched voice. I started following a number of leads and my investigation has found that over the past year, Shai Hasaikai has been increasing its contact with other organizations, including groups with less than reputable business dealings. Their aim seems to be expansion of their organization and increasing its commerce. Something else worthy of note, they made contact with a member of the League of Villains, Jean Babaigawara, better known as the Villain Twice. At this point they became wary of being tailed which made it too difficult for me to follow them, but with help from the police we managed to determine that some kind of altercation had taken place between the groups. As he was speaking, the projector was switching between slides with the latest being the sight of a building with a hole that had apparently been blasted open. It was also at about that point that they decided to reach out to me and Tsukachi given our familiarity with the League of Villains. He's currently following up with eyewitnesses which is why he ain't here at the moment, said Gran Torino before directing his next comment towards Izuku, and sorry to say kid but I got a feeling that things are about to turn ugly. I don't care I still want to help, said Midoriya before turning to Mirio to explain how he knew Gran Torino. Now then, said Bubble Girl, after this was brought to our attention we posted a notice on the HN-. I don't think we need to mention that part, Centipeder pointed out, causing Bubble Girl to stutter a bit as she looked through her notes for the next important point. What exactly is the HN? Asked Uraraka for both her and Tsuyu. Oh it's short for Hero Network, explained Nijire, an online service used only by pro heroes that lets them see what the other heroes are up to, and it can be used to ask for help from people whose quirks might come in handy. Someone mind explaining to me why a bunch of high school kids are at this meeting, said a dark-skinned hero with a yellow scarf and domino mask named Rocklock. I don't care that they're UA kids, we'll never get to the actual plan if we have to stop and explain everything. Says the guy who is literally stopping this whole thing for an explanation which was given at the beginning of the meeting. Clay pointed out with a hint of annoyance, we're alts here because we have something to contribute to this case. He's right, said a large round man in a yellow suit that covered even his head as he indicated Kirishima and Amajiki. Both of my work studies here have important information on this case. Oh, and for the newer heroes around here I'm Fat Gum. And he is here due to his history of stopping drag dealers, explained Nighteye. We suspect one of the sources of Shy Hasaikai's income is illegal drag sales. And Kirishima here proved he could too when he stopped a bullet meant for Amajiki, said Fat Gum. And in that bullet was a particular drag that has the nasty effect of destroying quirks? This got the rest of the pros' attention as Mirio stood up from his seat in worry. But you're okay now, right, Tamaki? Said a worried Mirio. The quiet member of the Big Three morphed his arm into something resembling a lamb's foot, showing that his quirk was indeed still active. Well, the good news is this stuff doesn't destroy quirks permanently, said Rocklock. I believe Eraserhead can explain the reason behind that, said Nighteye as he gave the floor to Aizawa. The drag seems to function differently from my own quirk, explained the Erasure hero as he pointed to his eyes. What I do doesn't actually attack the quirk. You see, what we know as a quirk is an addition to an otherwise ordinary human body known as quirk genes. What I do is shield those genes and block their expression temporarily. But after Tamaki was shot, the doctors at the hospital discovered that his quirk genes were actually damaged. Fortunately, they've healed and his quirk is back to normal now, said Fat Gum. We've also come to learn that only his quirk was attacked while the rest of his body was fine. The guy who did the shooting won't say a word, but one of the bullets he shot bounced off of Kirishima's hardening quirk, and thanks to that we have a viable sample. Seriously, I did that, said a confused Kirishima as Uraraka and Tsuyu congratulated him on a job well done. And upon analysis of it we found something that made me absolutely sick, said Fat Gum. The bullet contained human blood as well as cells. Slade didn't miss the way Mirio and Izuku tensed up at hearing this information. The other UA students were also relatively unnerved hearing it. Well, that pretty much confirms what we feared, Clay and Slade thought. So it comes from a person then, said Ryukyu, a quirk capable of destroying other quirks? But what connects all of this to Hasaikai? Questioned a pro in a type of skull mask. The man who had the anti-quirk bullet also had a quirk-enhancing drag, explained Fat Gum. The distribution chains are complex for that kind of thing, but we do know that one of the companies responsible for moving it has interacted with Hasaikai. Is that all we have to go on? Asked the skull-masked pro. We also found an inferior drag was used recently in a fight between two individuals with gigantification quirks, said Ryukyu. The drag was distributed by the same intermediary companies used by Hasaikai, said Nighteye. Not to mention a number of other gang-related clashes recently which could be connected to the Shy Hasaikai if you try hard enough. The key word there is try, almost like you're trying to make them look guilty, said the skull-masked pro. Do we really not have anything more concrete? How about this, said Clay as he and Slade held up a couple of photos Gang Orca had given them. The big guy in this photo is called Rikia Katsukame, a member of the 8 expendables who work under the Shy Hasaikai. And the midget in this photo is a rather high-class member known as Mimic, Slade continued. Clay and I had a run-in with the both of them during one of our patrols with Gang Orca's sidekick Seal. We got away obviously while also nabbing the same quirk enhancement drag used by the gang member Kirishima took down. And what's more, said Nighteye as he sucked to a slide of the Hasaikai leader, we managed to uncover some new information about their young head Kai Chisaki, quirk, Overhaul. He possesses the power to disassemble and reassemble matter, much like the bullet that can tear apart quirks. It seems he has a daughter named Eri who has no records or details surrounding her biarch. When Midoriya and Mirio encountered her, they noted bandages wrapped around both her arms and legs. That man would really do something so horrific to his own daughter, said Ryukyu with a tone of horror in her voice. Unfortunately, in a world of superhumans, if you can dream it up then you can probably do it, said Gran Torino. What exactly do you mean by that? Questioned Kirishima. And once again, why are high school kids here? Said Rocklock. Apparently think we can't put 2 and 2 together, said an annoyed Slade. Do you really think we can't grasp that a man is extracting and selling bullets from his own daughter's body on the black market? The other UA student's eyes widened in realization at the horror of what he'd just said. To be perfectly clear, we're not certain they're in the process of fully marketing them yet, said Nighteye. It's very likely they're still testing at this point and giving out samples to other groups to rally more people to his cause. While we don't have anything concrete yet, it is clear Shai Hasaikai is gathering funds and allies from across the nation, and should this drag be perfected to the point of fully annihilating someone's quirk, the devastation will be horrendous. So what are we waiting for? Said Fat Gum with a clenched fists. Let's get out there and take him down. We could have avoided a lot of trouble if these two amateurs had just Rocklock started to say before a fist slamming on the table stopped him. Don't put this on them. Clay yelled. All you've done this entire meeting is slow things down by complaining about us being here, and now you apparently think the two of them would have stood a chance against the head of a Yakuza group who could have easily had half a dozen guards shadowing him. And here I thought you were a pro. What did you just say, punk? Said Rocklock as he moved to stand up. Enough, said Nighteye. Mr. Zero is right in this case. The blame lies with me and not with them. Both acted in their own way to save the girl, with Mirio deciding that it was best to wait for a better opportunity to save her, which is precisely what we've come here to discuss. Izuku and Mirio shot to their feet, determination and frustration clear in their movements. We'll get her back next time, said Mirio with a clenched fist. We'll definitely save her, declared Midoriya. Great that you're talking big and all, said Rocklock, but if the implications are all true, that girl is at the center of Hasaikai's whole drag operation, and given that she was seen by a couple of heroes, there's no way he's gonna keep her at home. If we go in looking for her and Chisaki catches on, we can kiss any chance we have of finding the girl goodbye. Do you have a plan for that, Nighteye? Asked Ryukyu. It's a conundrum, no doubt, he said as a map of Japan appeared on the projector with several marked locations. The success of our initial strike is crucial, which is why we've compiled a list of groups connected to Hasaikai as well as properties owned by the organization. This will serve as our starting point. What I would like is for each of you to investigate the locations shown here. Well, that explains why there's pros of all ranks here, thought Clay as he looked around. Each one of these heroes patrols the area around the location and would know it better than anyone else. I'm surprised someone who worked with All Might for so long is such a cautious planner, said Fat Gum. Why can't we just go take him down? Every minute we waste is another minute that girl is having to suffer. We cannot do this like All Might would, said Nighteye. We must be meticulous and find the correct moment to strike. Hate to say it, but he's right, said Gran Torino. If we rush in too soon and fail to rescue her, it'll be nothing but fuel to the fire, like how capturing Stain only seemed to encourage villains. It wouldn't surprise me if it wound up making quirk-destroying weapons more popular. You're overthinking this, said Fat Gum. We won't get anything done if we just keep sitting here talking about it. There is one question I happen to have, said Aizawa with a raise of his hand. I'm not familiar with the specifics of your quirks, so forgive me if I get something wrong. But from what I hear, your quirk foresight gives you the ability to see into someone's future, so why not simply use it on us to determine what'll happen? I'm afraid it's not as simple as that, said Nighteye somewhat gloomily. My foresight is more limited than you think. I have to wait 24 hours between each activation before I can use it again, which means I could only look at one of you a day. In addition, what I'm seeing is played in my mind as more of a flashback, like a film strip detailing a person's life. But it's a very tight viewing and makes it difficult for me to determine context. It would still be a fair amount of information, Aizawa pointed out, and you haven't answered the part about why you specifically can't do it. Let me pose a question then, said Nighteye as he adjusted his glasses. What if I saw very imminent death in your near future? Or even worse, a cruel and merciless end? I believe my quirk should only be employed after we've determined the highest likelihood of success so that it can help ensure our victory. It's not something that should be relied upon when there are still this many uncertainties. Wait a minute, said Rocklock. Possible death is still information, and if we know what's coming we can figure out how not to get killed. You misunderstand, said Knight. It's very likely what I see is an unavoidable fate. That's the excuse you're going with, exclaimed Rocklock as he stood up. Just use it on me then, and I'll prove to you right now I can beat her. The pro-hero was interrupted mid-sentence by a gray bullet shooting across the room and stopping just next to his head. Death 1, loud lock 0, said Clay as the bullet-shaped cloud reverted back to its more vaporous state and returned to its wielder, circling around his hand until it became a small skull and crossbones. The future is an ever-changing thing. Consider for a moment that the event he sees might actually be because he told you about impending death in the first place? Or better yet, consider that he didn't see death in your future at all and then you let your guard down and die anyway because you assumed you were golden? Geez, alright, said Rocklock as he sat back down. Truth be told, neither Clay nor Slade were certain of the reason for Nighteye not using his quirk, but they figured it was complicated. Clay, I've told you there's a time and a place to employ intimidation, said Aizawa. Save it for the villains. Yeah, I got carried away, said Clay. Slade here just gave me a lecture about the dynamics of shaping the future yesterday, so it kind of slipped out. Whatever the case, we need to remember there's a child in trouble, said Ryukyu with a sigh. So we'd best get started. Indeed, said Nighteye as he regained his composure and stood up. Our top priority is to confirm the girl's location and take her into our custody as quickly as possible using the most accurate data we can ascertain. I am counting on the help of all of you in this room. The gathered pros and students were dismissed then as Clay and Slade went to a table outside of the room and sat down with the rest of their friends. It was obvious what was weighing on Izuku and Mirio's mind. If I had just rescued her then, said Midoriya with his head hung low. Even if Chisaki had resorted to force, at least she would have been safe. You mean that's why you've been so distracted lately? Said Kirishima. That's just damn frustrating. We all know you tried. Deku consoled Uraraka from her seat at the table. I still agree with what Clay said, Slade chimed in. Maybe you could have gotten her away, but it's just as if not more likely that you both would have died in the attempt, and then who would have saved her? No one was sure if this had any positive effect as the elevator to the lobby opened and Aizawa stepped out. Is there some kind of funeral I don't know about? Said the erasure hero as he approached his students. Oh, hello, Mr. Aizawa, sir, said Tsuyu politely for the rest of them. Just call me Eraser Head outside of school, said their sensei as he stopped in front of them. Anyway, I suppose it's just my luck you all got involved in this. I was actually going to recommend a suspension of your work studies before all this. What? Said most of the gathered students at the table before Kirishima spoke up. But why, sir? I take it you did hear the part about the League of Villains being involved, right? Replied Aizawa. That changes more than a few things. The pro-hero sighed before continuing. My big concern is you, Midoriya. You haven't fully earned my trust again, but I'm positive that if I tried to stop you now you'd only take matters into your own hands again and do something reckless. So instead I've decided I'll watch you and make sure you do this the right way, with your head. Can you do at least that, problem child? He made his point with a light punch to where Izuku's heart was. Midoriya nodded in understanding, knowing full well what he was asking. And one more thing, just to give you some peace of mind. Even if you didn't save her before, you still may have managed to give her hope. So eyes up and keep looking forward. I will, declared Izuku as Uraraka was actually sniffling a bit at the moving scene before her. That's right, said Mirio as he pulled himself out of his own funk and stood up. We'll definitely save her next time, Midoriya. We will, no matter what, agreed Midoriya as he looked at all of his friends. We'll save her together. UA Gym Gamma. Even though a few days had passed since the meeting at Nighteye's agency, it was more than a little obvious that what was discussed still lingered in the minds of the work-study students. All of them had been put on standby while the pros narrowed down the number of locations where the girl, Eri, was being kept. In the meantime, none of them were allowed to discuss what was happening with their other classmates. A fact which was more than a little ironic for Clay and Slade given that they'd already spilled the beans to Jairu and Momo before the meeting. It still made for a daily tension of sorts as each of them checked their phones hourly or sometimes even more often than that for any kind of update on the situation. Clay did his best to pry information out of his uncle, but the man was sticking by what he'd told them that day. Flashback. Nighteye Agency. Try not to get too worked up about this, said Aizawa, causing Midoriya to pause for a moment. The big three are capable of holding their own out there with the pros, but the rest of you will have to be minimally involved. In fact, Uraraka, Azui, and Kirishima, since you didn't really volunteer for this, you're under no obligation to participate, so it's your call if you want to continue. Mr. Eraserhead, said Uraraka as she got up from her seat. After everything we just heard, I can't see any reason why I shouldn't at least try to help. And I want to pitch in too, said Tsuyu. I'll help however I can. I'm pretty sure the pros already recognize your abilities, said Tamaki in his usual withdrawn tone. They wouldn't have asked you to be in that meeting otherwise. I've seen for myself that a first year can shine much brighter than me. You know you're gonna have to let that go at some point, commented Nijire as she leaned forward in her seat. Well, if I can use my power to help that girl even a little bit, said Kirishima as he slammed his hardened fists together, then you can count me in Eraserhead. Just so long as you remember that our only goal is to rescue Eri, said Aizawa. We're not stepping in further than that. The chances of the League and Shai Hasaikai cooperating are pretty low at the moment given the recent altercation. But if the police happen to be mistaken about that assessment and they are working together, then we're pulling you out immediately, understood? Yes, sir, exclaimed everyone with varying degrees of determination. UA cafeteria, now. Clay and Slade knew something was up with Midoriya. Their friend was ready and more than eager to jump in and help Eri, but despite that he'd been acting down. Currently, said green-haired boy was just staring as his katsudon as if he was looking through it. Are you not hungry, Midoriya? Asked Todoroki suddenly, causing the UA student to almost jump from his seat. What? Oh yeah, sure, said Midoriya as he made a show of putting some of the food in his mouth. Are you feeling all right lately? Asked Ida, who was sitting next to him. You've been on edge and rather depressed ever since you started your work study, noted Todoroki. Oh, have I been acting that way? Asked Izuku innocently as he went back to his food. Big time, said Slade. I'm half convinced you'd still be moping even if Uraraka was holding your hand right now. You don't really think it's that bad, do you? Exclaimed Midoriya, likely embarrassed by the image he now had in his head. Well, if something is troubling you, just remember, said Ida with his classic air-chopping maneuver, we're friends and we're here if you ever want to talk. I seem to recall you saying something similar to me when I was heading off to my own internship and acting like a fool. That was the straw that broke the camel's back as tears started flowing from Midoriya's eyes, and Ida's hair stood on end. Aya! Oh dear, was it something I said? No, it's all okay, said Izuku as he ate the rest of his lunch before trying to wipe the tears from his eyes. Heroes aren't supposed to cry. Who told you that? Asked Clay. Despite their outward appearances, heroes are still people in the end. And every so often, people need to cry if for no other reason than to let out some pent-up feelings. Even my uncle has cried a time or two. So tears can form even in Aizawa-sensei's dry eyes, noted Todoroki. Yeah, but don't tell him I told you that, said Clay. If you think the class workload Esikas, now just wait till you see what he does to students who think he's getting soft. Agreed, said Ida. Our sensei is a MSTR of dsPLN and won't hesitate to use it on us. But it does give me an idea, said Slade as he looked at Midoriya. Let's talk later. I think I might know how to help. UA Heights Alliance, that evening. So what is it you guys wanted to talk about? Questioned Midoriya as the group sat out on the lawn in front of the dorms. Well, it's obvious the whole Eri situation has been eating at you the last couple of days, said Clay, but you have a small group of friends you can still talk to about that. Given the breakdown you had earlier today, I gotta ask, is something else bothering you? Midoriya looked unsure for a moment as to whether or not he should answer. If it's an All Might thing, remember we pretty much know as much about it as you, Slade pointed out, so you shouldn't need to keep it a secret from us. All Might could die this year. Izuku suddenly blurted out, really getting their attention. The reason Sir Nighteye and All Might parted ways in the first place is because All Might refused to retire and find a successor sooner. This information actually stunned his two friends as both of them tried to figure out what exactly to say to that. Both knew it must not have been good news, but to hear that the idol of their friend could die at some point, it was more than a little to take in. What did he say? Questioned Clay suddenly, making Midoriya look up at him. How exactly did Nighteye word his explanation to All Might? He said All Might would do battle with an incredibly powerful villain and meet an unspeakably gruesome death, explained Midoriya with a few tears coming to his eyes. So, said Slade, it sounds like he might have actually been wrong on that one. What? But Sir Nighteye can see the future, said Midoriya. How could he be wrong? Well, what Nighteye sees is only a narrow vision of a person's future decisions, Clay reminded him. Or are you thinking about what he said when he suggested his vision of someone's death was unavoidable? Well, All Might said that he ended up exactly how Nighteye said he would, explained Midoriya, and if he's not wrong about that, then what about his death? If I might play the optimist for a moment, said Slade, All Might did in fact fight an incredibly fierce villain, but he won and now he's retired with very little reason to be anywhere near a fight again. And the way you phrased it, could die this year, I think you said, makes it sound like the supposed event could have already passed. Well, it's true that Nighteye's vision might be slightly less informative the further he looks into the future, admitted Midoriya, but why would he say the death he sees is unavoidable? Because that is what he himself likely believes, said Clay. It's possible after years of peering into others' futures he's formed a preconceived notion that some of the things he sees in the future are unavoidable, or that because he sees them they'll come true. Are you suggesting he's afraid to use his quirk? Questioned Midoriya. The future can be a scary thing, said Slade. Take right now for instance. Everyone who grew up seeing All Might in their lives is now asking the question of what tomorrow will bring now that the symbol of peace is gone. Many expect it to be a dimmer future, but that doesn't mean it's what's going to happen. I believe Sir Nighteye is overestimating himself and putting too much value in his quirk, which is likely why he thinks what he sees will always come true. But as they like to say in time-traveling sci-fi, Clay picked up, the future is ever-changing. In my opinion, the true outcome is only really determined when it reaches that moment. Nighteye might believe what he sees will come to pass, but if he was 100% sure of it, then why would he even bother warning All Might? That makes a certain bit of sense in a weird way, said Midoriya with a hand on his chin. He doesn't like using his quirk when he thinks death is possible, but he's got no way of actually knowing that him seeing something causes it to end up that way. He wants to be wrong about it, he wants fate to change. And I'm certain All Might thinks the same, said Slade, so fight fate with him and show his former sidekick that no future is written in stone. I will, said Midoriya with his fists clenched. You're both right, there's no sense in moping around waiting for the inevitable, not when something can still be done. So I'll show All Might and Nighteye that someone can fight fate, and I'll start by rescuing Eri. The three friends cheered excitedly at this prospect as they bumped fists, the somber atmosphere completely gone as a weight was lifted from their friend's mind. It was 2 days after this little chat, when they finally got the call. Sir Nighteye's hero office. They're keeping her where? Exclaimed Rocklock as he heard the report from All Might's former sidekick. The main headquarters of the Shai Hasaikai, Ryukyu answered for him, Kai Chisaki's residence? So what was the point of all that investigating in the first place? Questioned Rocklock. We managed to gather a variety of new information, answered Nighteye, including some of the layout of the facility beneath the residence. What's our confirmation that she's even still there? Questioned Fat Gum. Nighteye's answer to this was to, surprisingly, pull out a pink box containing a magical girl action figure of sorts. One of the Shai Hasaikai members purchased a toy like this the other day at a local department store. This item is typically favored by young girls. But what proof do you have that he's not some weirdo who's into cutesy stuff? Objected Fat Gum. Because I was there when he purchased the item, explained Nighteye. I employed my quirk to see what he planned to do with it, and my assumption was correct. He took it to where the girl is being held. So after all that talk about being afraid to use your quirk, you go ahead and use foresight anyway? Exclaimed Rocklock. Probably because he gives a lot less of a DMN if death is near in a villain's future, thought Clay. I recall saying that I would use my quirk when our path was more clear, replied Nighteye. But it does mean we finally have all the information we need for a raid, right? Said Fat Gum. Correct, said Centipeder. We already have a time selected thanks to the information from our stakeouts. And we've already obtained a search warrant from the police, added Bubble Girl happily, so all that's left now is to go barging right in, said a determined Fat Gum. Hey, that was supposed to be my line, whined Bubble Girl at having her thunder stolen. Yeah, let's do it, yelled Mirio as he waved his arms around animatedly. We're gonna rescue that girl, are you all with me? He continued to repeat this and a number of other lines, signifying how pumped up he was about the whole thing. Guess he's back to normal, thought Slade, having heard about the Big Three members' recently depressed state. It was good news at this point as everyone changed into their costumes and put on their game faces, more than ready to take down anyone that got in their way. Now then, said Nighteye, let the operation begin. In front of the police station, 8 a.m. More than a couple dozen officers all decked out in tactical gear with riot shields stood at attention while the pro heroes recruited by Nighteye stood in their own group. Currently, a police sergeant was going over the details of the operation, including what little they knew of the underground facility. It's all moving pretty fast now, said Kirishima as he and the UA students stood to the side, either making final adjustments to their costumes or going over the handouts of the known Hasaikai members and their quirks. You're surprisingly energetic for this hour of the morning, noted Amajiki. Yeah, but I'm pretty nervous, said Uraraka as she fidgeted. It all feels pretty official now that we're working with the police, noted Tsuyu as Ryukyu approached. It takes time to adjust at first, she said. School can teach you a lot, but there are some things you only learn from experience. I guess that explains how all the pros are so calm about this, said Kirishima as he tried to keep himself from shaking in excitement and nervousness. Speaking of the pros, has anyone seen Gran Torino? Questioned Midoriya. According to Uncle, said Clay as he checked the valves on his sleeves, the League of Villains is on the move, so he was sent to investigate. Maybe we'll get lucky and take both the League and Hasaikai down in one fell swoop, said Kirishima with a clenched fist. Don't get ahead of yourselves, said Aizawa, causing some of the students to tense up with his sudden appearance. Remember what you promised. If things get out of hand, you take cover, understand? The UA students all answered in the affirmative as the police sergeant spoke up. To all the heroes gathered here, said the sergeant, the situation could become violent quickly, so if you encounter even a hint of suspicious behavior or resistance, signal for backup immediately. Remember, it is imperative that each of you carry out your respective assignments, so stay sharp. The gathered officers saluted then as the sergeant gave out his final orders. The raid shall commence at 8:30 hours, now move out. Shai Hasaikai Main Stronghold, 8:30 a.m. The residence of Kai Chisaki was a rather large estate that more or less resembled a fancy bunker on the outside. Its courtyard was surrounded by a large wall with the traditional style one would expect from a Japanese roof. The main force of police officers as well as the pro heroes were all situated outside the main entrance with the sergeant poised to press the button for the estate's speaker system. Once we've read the warrant, said the sergeant, you'll all be free to move. So act swiftly. Don't gotta tell me twice, thought Clay as he generated his cloud gauntlets and greaves while Slade picked out a higher density. The gathered students all tensed as the sergeant reached for the intercom SW. But just as he was about to press it, Slade heard a slight noise which he'd come to recognize. Get back, yelled the density shifter upon realizing what was about to happen. No sooner did he say this than the front gate was busted open by the massive fist of Rikiya Katsukame. The impact was so strong it sent a number of officers flying into the air. Acting quickly, Midoriya leapt up and snatched one out of the air while Clay and Aizawa used a combination of his scarf and cloud cushions to catch the remaining officers. It's too early in the morning for visitors, said the massive, bird-masked Hasaikai member as he used his quirk to buff up his muscles even more. How in the world do they already know we're here? Questioned Rocklock. Doesn't matter, said Ryukyu as Rikiya lifted a muscled-up arm and threw a powerful blow. The resulting impact sent out a shockwave which forced everyone to back up a little as a dust cloud temporarily covered the affected area. When it cleared, Ryukyu had grown to several times her regular size as her body took on a much more dragon-like shape. We can't afford to split up too many forces now, she said as she held their enemy's fist back. So you all go ahead and let the Ryukyu agency handle this. She then proceeded to slam a clawed hand down on the Yakuza member, immobilizing him for the moment. Uraraka, Tsuyu and Nijire split off to back her up while the main force rushed headlong into the compound to face the foe awaiting them. Don't worry, little one, thought Clay, this time you will be saved. Main residence of Kai Chisaki. We have a warrant to search this premises, said the head sergeant as he, a force of police officers with riot shields, most of the gathered pros and 1A students charged in through the main gate. What, get out of here? Yelled one of the Yakuza thugs as a large collection of them moved out of the door to the compound to intercept the police. Many charged forward swinging their fists or other assorted blunt weapons while some actually resorted to using their quirks. Slade had to up his density to block a swarm of needles aimed at him before Clay leapt over his head and knocked the Yakuza out with a hard kick from his cloud greaves. The density shifter then continued to barrel through thug after thug, his enhanced weight making it impossible for them to slow down his momentum. The other pros broke out their assorted quirks or skills along the way, bringing down the majority of the Yakuza trying to stop them and clearing a path for Nighteye and Fat Gum's groups to barge into the main entrance. "Sorry we can't take our shoes off," said Fat Gum, "but we're kind of in a hurry here." The hallways were less crowded as the pros and students rushed down them, following Nighteye's lead. "They seem to be somewhat prepared for us," noted Amajiki as they ran. "Our plans weren't leaked, were they?" "I think they just managed to catch wind of our plan," stated the police sergeant. "Their response was faster than expected, but it's not cohesive. Groups like these can usually coordinate fairly well, so the fact that they're simply swarming means they didn't have time to plan a trap. It's a staple of groups like these," continued Aizawa. "They all have a strong bond with their boss and those they see as brothers. Loyalty is all the more sacred because they're part of the underworld." "But where are the bosses then?" questioned Kirishima angrily. "These guys are out there fighting for them while they hide or run away. How can that be considered manly or loyal?" No one had time to answer his question as Nighteye brought them to a halt at one of the walls which had a flower vase and a picture with Japanese writing. "The entrance to their underground headquarters is here," said Nighteye as he moved the vase aside. "It's activated by hidden switches which need to be pressed in a specific order. Once that's done." He didn't need to finish the rest of his sentence as the section of wall they were standing in front of moved back and slid aside to reveal a hidden staircase. "Wow, they went all ninja hideout with this place," said Bubble Girl. And much like ninjas, a trio of Yakuza thugs ran out from the shadows, attempting to stab the heroes with an assortment of knives. Centipede reacted quickly and shot out a pair of centipede-shaped tendrils to restrain two of the thugs while Bubble Girl made use of her own quirk, popping a soap bubble in her attacker's face to blind him before grabbing his arm and twisting him to the floor with a takedown maneuver. "We'll hold these guys here, you keep going." "You heard Bubble Girl," said Nighteye to the remaining raiders. "Let's move." The group hesitated only a moment before they proceeded down the stairs and turned into a long hallway. But before they got very far, the collective heroes ran into a large wall in the middle of the hallway. "I thought your quirk could see the future, Nighteye," complained Rocklock. "How did you miss something like this?" "His quirk sees future decisions by the people he's watching," Clay reminded him. "If the one he was watching didn't see this wall put up, then neither did he." "I'll take a quick look then," said Mirio as he stepped forward and examined the wall. "But won't you be naked if you use your quirk right now?" questioned Kirishima, remembering all too well the sight 1A had seen fighting him. "Don't worry," said Amajiki. "Mirio's costume is made of a special fiber which uses his hair. It'll become permeable along with him whenever he uses his quirk," which was proving very useful right now as the big three member stuck his head through the wall for a moment before pulling it back out. "The hallway continues past this point," reported Mirio. "This wall was specially constructed just to block our way, so breaking through it probably won't be easy. So that Chisaki guy's quirk can tear apart and reform matter to this extent," Rocklock thought aloud. "It has to mean we're getting close," said Midoriya as he and Kirishima activated their quirks. "Nice trick or not," said Kirishima. "This guy's an idiot if he thinks we'll be stopped by some wall." The two 1A students hit the obstacle at the same time, shattering the stone completely to create a hole big enough for even Fat Gum to fit through easily. "Good work you two," said Mirio. "Now let's get moving." The group complied as they continued their run through the hallways. "This is weird," thought Clay as his eyes darted around the area. "They sent out a whole host of their goons upstairs to slow us down, but where's the rest of Chisaki's personal guard?" He got his answer soon enough as the room began to shake around them. Or, to be more accurate, the room was twisting and contorting like it was made of liquid. "What's going on?" asked Midoriya as everyone tried to keep their footing. "It must be Mimic's quirk," said the police sergeant as he stumbled around along with them. "He can enter objects and control them as if they were his own body. But he usually can't control something this large. It's more than likely their performance-enhancing drag," surmised Fat Gum as he tried not to bump into anyone in the swaying room. Any chance you can stop this guy from using his quirk? Slade asked Eraserhead as he increased his density to get better footing. I can't do much of anything without seeing his real body, replied Eraserhead, but that's not our only option. Clay, get us a platform above the floor. On it, replied the cloud wielder as he floated off the floor and produced a thin but dense layer of clouds which everyone hopped onto. That's quite a useful quirk you got there, complimented Fat Gum. The floor can thrash all it wants now, but it won't slow us down anymore. Don't be so sure, said Clay as he tried to move them forward, only for a wall to raise up and block their way. We won't get anywhere at this rate, said Mirio as he jumped off and raced towards the wall. Mirio, what are you doing? Called Amajiki, unable to follow after his friend. Time is of the essence right now, said Mirio. The Hasaikai know it, so they're trying to stall us. I'm going on ahead to try and slow them down. Catch up to me when you can. Amajiki tried protesting more, but his words weren't heard as the permeation quirk users slipped through the wall. We need to bust through that wall now, exclaimed Kirishima as he urged Clay to move his cloud platform closer. But the room closed in around them as a hole opened in the floor. CRP, said Clay as he quickly dropped the platform downward, already knowing he was playing into the enemy's hands by doing so. The good news, at least, was that this new room wasn't being controlled by Mimic. It meant he could withdraw his cloud platform to further strengthen his gauntlets and greaves while also forming a long cloud scarf around his shoulders. Now where in the world are we? Asked Midoriya as they looked around the new room. Further from our target is where, answered Rocklock. We need to find a way out. I'm afraid that's a bit out of the question for you government-authorized thugs, said a man in a type of scarecrow mask. He was joined by another man in a green button-up shirt and a bird beak mask who was wielding a sword, as well as a much larger bald man wearing a type of medical mask. Sets Uno, Hojo, and Tabe, Clay surmised as he recalled the info sheets he'd read on the Shy Hasaikai. All of them are members of the 8 Expendables? Guess we've got a fight on our hands, said Fat Gum as he brought his fist into his open palm. I just hope you petty criminals are ready for the strength of a pro-dashed. The hero was suddenly silenced as Amajiki raised his hand up to stop him. The pros should save their strength for rescuing our target, said Amajiki with a surprising amount of determination. These guys are only meant to slow us down, so I'll handle them myself. You don't have to do that, said Kirishima. We can take them on together. I'd like you all to say, said the blonde expendable as he tilted his sword. I'll be able to your whole group then. We'll have to leave them up to you pros, said the police sergeant. Our guns won't work on him. Very good, you've all done your homework, sneered the expendable, which means I can really cut loose. The man shot forward with his hand outstretched, attempting to use his quirk to steal something. But Eraserhead was faster and used his eyes to prevent that. What? My quirk isn't working. His tall accomplice attempted to step in by pulling out a gun and aiming it at Aizawa, only to be quickly disarmed by a speeding cloud blade from Clay. Their quirks are off, now's your chance, Amajiki, he said while withdrawing his cloud. The big 3-member didn't hesitate on that signal as he produced several large octopus tentacles from his hand and wrapped up the villains, simultaneously seizing their weapons while slamming them all on the ground. Like I said before, I can handle these guys, said Amajiki as he crushed the gathered weapons in a crab claw. It isn't the best move right now for all of us to fight them because they're trying to stall us. But if they're just stalling me, then the rest of you can head on. You'll need everyone's quirk for this, including Eraserhead's. I know this is something I can do, Fat Gum, so please, get going. His words were obviously met with a bit of hesitation by the round pro before he turned and headed for what they hoped was an exit. Let's get going, said Fat Gum, clearly surprising Kirishima as the rest of the pros started to move in that direction. Hey, why are you all leaving? Said the blonde expendable as he attempted to use his quirk again, before being quickly shut down by Aizawa, who also moved in and knocked out the expendable with the scarecrow mask. Beat them before they can fight back, Amajiki, said Aizawa as he also moved towards the exit. I will, said the big 3-member as he slammed them all into the nearby wall, and take care of Mirio. I know he'll try way too hard and get in over his head, so please, keep him safe. The 1A students nodded in understanding before heading out the door, continuing their race down the maze of hallways. "Are you crazy just leaving him back there, Fat Gum?" asked a worried Kirishima. "His attitude may make it seem otherwise," replied the pro, "but he's stronger than most of us here, so I have faith in him. Truth of the matter is, his weakness is self-confidence. He feels pressured to be perfect and it often causes him to mess up. Despite that, he still became one of UA's big three, so if he says he can do it, I've got no reason not to trust him and believe in him." "Are you sure?" asked Kirishima. "I can't help but worry about the guy." "Look, if you've left a comrade to guard your back, then you have to be a man about it and trust him," exclaimed Fat Gum. "Got it, he'll handle those guys no problem," exclaimed Kirishima. "Didn't take much to change your mind, did it?" thought Slade as they continued to run. "We've got our own concerns to worry about at the moment," said Aizawa as he looked down the hallway. "I'm not sure if any of you noticed, but the hallways and floors aren't twisting like they were before." "Is it possible we've gone beyond the point he's able to control with his quirk?" suggested Clay. "There were a bunch of police officers behind us when we went through the floor. There's a chance he's too preoccupied to come after us." "You really think there's a limit to how much of this building he can control?" asked Rocklock. "We're only talking in theory at the moment," said Aizawa. "His quirk allows him to move into objects to control them. It's possible his real body is actually moving around in the building and isn't far from the sections he's manipulating. But doesn't that beg the question of how quickly he can move through the building?" Slade pointed out. "Once he's determined the officers back there aren't a main priority, won't he come after us?" The density shifter's question was answered fairly quickly as a large stone hand shot out of the wall right at Eraserhead. "Sensei!" exclaimed Clay as he, Fat Gum, and Kirishima all reached for the erasure hero, trying to prevent him from being pushed into a newly formed hole in the wall. Fat Gum reached him first, managing to push his colleague out of the way. But he himself was pushed down the hole in the process. "Fat, be careful down there," said Eraserhead as he got back to his feet. "Oh no," said Midoriya as he noticed another absence. "Kirishima's gone too." "He must have gotten trapped in between Fat Gum and the wall," said Slade with a face palm. "Whatever the case," said Knight, "we have to keep moving. Fat Gum is a seasoned pro, so he should be able to handle whatever's thrown at him. We need to catch up to Mirio." The group collectively agreed as they again ran down the pathway towards their goal. But it didn't take long for the floors, ceiling and walls to start contorting again. "Not this time," said Clay as he spread his clouds out into multiple small platforms, this time for the collective pros and students to jump on. "Rocklock, your quirk," ordered Aizawa as he tried and failed to find the main body of their foe. Yeah, he said, "quit acting like the de facto leader. Deadbolt." The pro put his hand on the wall and turned it like one would turn a doorknob. A red wave of energy spread throughout the area and stopped the movement of the room. This was his quirk lockdown in action. Anything he used it on would be locked in place. It might not work on living things or excessively large areas, but the area he did cover was more than enough for them to keep on moving. "Incoming," said Slade as he noticed some movement from behind them. The wall itself was racing towards them now from the area Rocklock's quirk hadn't reached. "Full cowling shoot style," said Midoriya as he leapt forward and smashed the oncoming stone again and again, breaking through it. Slade moved in as well, tackling any sections his friend missed and smashed through them with a high-density body. "We need to pinpoint his location," said Aizawa, "otherwise he's just gonna keep aiming for us and funneling us into traps. And I've already got my hands full pulling people away from a charging wall," thought Clay as he gathered those on his clouds to a location behind him and the other pros. Slade and Midoriya were continuing to smash through the charging wall columns until suddenly, it all pulled away. "Oh, that can't be good," said Clay. "Midoriya, you and Slade best get back here before Sheet." Mimic had already made his next move as a collection of walls came down around them, splitting the group up. "Well, this is just great," said Clay as he noted that he'd somehow wound up with Rocklock as the other occupant in the newly formed prison. "Hey, can anyone hear us out there?" called Rocklock. "We're fine," said Nighteye, "but be on the lookout for their next move." "Yeah, no kidding," said Rocklock as he and Clay glanced around the confined space. "You got any good tricks for busting through walls, Cloud Kid?" "My quirk's uses lie in versatility, not brute power," And this wall is definitely tougher than the basic armor on UA's smaller robots, explained Clay, but if we just wait a moment we might dash. His explanation was interrupted by a roar as a massive shape dropped from the ceiling. The pro and student rolled in opposite directions to avoid the impact as Clay formed a pair of spike ball for combat against Rikia Katsukame? But he was out front, so how can he be here unless… Rocklock heads up. His warning came just in time as a familiar, knife-wielding blonde leapt up from seemingly nowhere and tried to stab him in the back. Rocklock managed to turn in time to block the stab with his hand and, despite the pain of having a blade driven through it, managed to lock her weapon in place before striking back with a punch of his own. But the one he struck turned into gray goo from the attack, confirming Clay's fears as he moved out of the way of Rikia's fist. It seems that altercation or not, the worst-case scenario had come to pass. The Hasaikai was getting some help in their current operation from the League of Villains. Shy Hasaikai Underground Hideout. The situation had gone from manageable to bad real fast. Thanks to Mimic's boosted quirk, the main group had all been split up into smaller parties by a number of walls. Clay and Rocklock had been caught somewhere in the middle, and to make matters worse, the League of Villains had finally shown its face with the arrival of Himiko Toga, who'd managed to take out Rocklock after he was distracted by a double made by the villain twice. Clay himself managed to dodge out of the way of what he surmised was a double of Rikia Katsukame before firing one of his currently spikeball-shaped clouds at Toga, forcing her away from Rocklock as the hero in training landed next to him protectively. "Oh, look who it is," sang Toga happily as she clasped her hands while still holding her knife. "Aren't you one of Midoriya's friends, Cloudy Seer or something like that?" "My hero name is Cirrus," replied Clay as he did his best to discreetly wrap some of his clouds around Rocklock's wounds. "And you're Himiko." "Toga. Tell me, why's the League of Villains helping out the Yakuza? I thought you guys had something of a fight." "We did," said Toga as a frown crossed her face. "That Shisaki guy killed Magna and hurt Compress. I really didn't have a choice to be here, but…" She took a ready stance as her manic smile returned to her face. "Now that I know you're here, that must mean Midoriya isn't far behind. Hey, if you take me to him I'll make your death nice and quick." "Yeah, that's a hard pass," exclaimed the Cloud Wielder as he sent his other gathered spike ball at both Toga and the Rikia double. The blonde nimbly flipped and rolled out of the way, laughing as if she was playing a game while Katsukame took the brunt of the attack, receiving only enough damage to make some of his edges turn back to goo. Clay went airborne then with Rocklock in tow to avoid a pincer maneuver from the two villains. "Gotta keep a fair distance here," he thought as he sent Rocklock to float in the air above him before forming two large cloud fists and sending them downward. The Rikia clone managed to block them with his own large fists while Toga jumped off his shoulder and scrambled up the high-density clouds. Clay responded quickly as he tried reshaping them into a sphere to catch his adversary, but she was quicker and managed to leap back down before they closed around her. "Don't waste a move," he thought as he reshaped the cloud again into a giant buzz saw which he sent flying down at his opponent. Ordinarily he wouldn't use such a lethal move, but given that the enemy who was currently catching and holding the attack with his massive hands wasn't even alive, he figured he could use a bit more force than normal. "Now try this," he said as he reshaped the saw into a wheel with long spikes that dug into the clone's skin. "Cloud Wheel Grinder." The part of the cloud, Rikia, didn't had his hand on started spinning then, tearing into the clone at high speed until his body started breaking down from the spinning attack. Before long, he was reduced back to gray goo which was flung all around the enclosed space before he stopped the cloud and returned it to float near him. "Wow, twice stubbles really aren't as durable as the real thing," commented Toga. "Oh well. Guess it's just you and Ba." Her little remark was cut short as Midoriya busted through the wall with full cowling activated as Aizawa followed closely after him. "Clay, are you in here?" called Midoriya as he looked around frantically. "Try glancing up real fast," said Clay, "and we've got an enemy too." "Where?" asked Aizawa as he scanned the room. Clay wondered what he was talking about until he noticed that Toga had managed to change her form into Rocklock. "Sheet, she must have gotten enough blood to transform." "In front of you," called Clay, "that's not Rocklock down there." His warning came just in time as Rocklock pulled out a knife and swiped at Midoriya. Eraserhead quickly turned his gaze on the imposter, causing her quirk to break apart and reveal a very naked Toga. She managed to ditch her clothes and change in that short of a time, Clay thought in mild amazement as he flew down towards his comrades. "Himiko Toga!" exclaimed Midoriya as he quickly backed away from her repeated slashes. "You remember me," exclaimed Toga happily as she continued to swipe at him. "I've wanted so badly to see you again, I'm so happy." But before she could get in another strike, she was quickly wrapped up by Eraserhead's scarf as he yanked her towards him. "You're done, Himiko Toga," he said. A fact the murderous girl clearly disagreed on as she managed to grab his scarf and pull on it, changing her direction in midair to flip over Eraserhead and aim a knife attack at his shoulder. But it was deflected by a quickly moving and relatively small cloud shield which knocked her weapon out of her hand. Despite the attack not being successful, however, Toga still managed to unravel herself the rest of the way from Aizawa's scarf before leaping away. Any attempt at pursuing her was quickly shut down as another wall was dropped in their way. "Sensei, are you all right?" asked Midoriya with a hint of worry in his voice. "I'm fine," replied the erasure hero as he checked his shoulder. Clay managed to block it in time. "More importantly, where's the Real Rocklock?" "I got M," said the cloud user as he lowered the pro from the air where he'd been hovering back down to the floor. "I've been using my clouds to apply pressure to the knife wound so far, but he needs proper bandaging to keep from bleeding out." "I'll take care of that," said Aizawa before turning to his friend. "Midoriya, Toga uses blood, so collect the knives around the area." "Right," replied the one-for-all holder as he rushed off to his new task. "We've confirmed Toga is here," said Clay, "and I took out a double of Rikiya, so that must mean Dashta." "Yeah," said Eraserhead, "Jean Babaigawara, the villain twice, is around here somewhere as well." "Outer Hall, at about the same time." "I'm feeling excited," exclaimed Twice as he and a copy of another Hasaikai member, a burly man with large fists, a white short-sleeved shirt and a bird mask which hid his face but not his mane of dark yellow hair, stepped out of a quickly appearing hole in the wall. "You know, I was wondering what kind of heroes we'd go up against, but look at this. Some schoolboy in dragon scales and a normal-looking businessman. What do you take the Yakuza for? Get em big bro rappa." The masked fighter stepped forward and threw an incredibly fast flurry of punches towards Nighteye and the other police officers before Slade stepped in with his arms held up in a blocking position. "Maximum density," Slade just managed to say before he was barraged by an unbelievable number of punches which, even with his density, still felt like he was being pummeled by a mass of baseballs. "This guy is nuts," thought Slade. Not only is he fast, his blows are overwhelmingly strong. Even Kirishima's maximum defense would barely keep up with this. Fortunately for Slade, he only needed to hold out for a couple of seconds. "You're quite strong," noted Nighteye as he ducked around Slade and used a powerful sweep kick to knock Rappa off his feet. Then, while his opponent was in midair, he threw out some kind of weighted weapons which knocked the villain across the room and slammed him into a wall with enough force to dent it. "What in the world?" said one of the police officers. "Just happened?" "These are my high-density seals," explained Nighteye as he revealed two more business stamp-like weapons, battle support items that weigh about 5 kilograms each. "Given my businessman appearance, don't you think they're quite humorous? As if anyone would laugh at them after seeing what you just did to that guy," thought Slade as the pro continued. "Make a prediction and move first. After seeing the future of so many, it seems I can do so a little faster than others in close combat. Though even I couldn't predict the famous League of Villains would be working with the Yakuza." "Well," Twice started to say before he noticed that his clone of Rappa was melting. "What, he melted already? What a useless Yakuza." He didn't get to say much else as Nighteye threw two more of his seals at the villain, managing to cut off part of his mask and damage the shoulder of his costume. "Ak, diamenit that hurt you yesterday." Twice proceeded to turn and flee down the hallway as the wall closed behind him, preventing pursuit. "Blast it," said Slade as he dropped his density and tried to move forward, only to stumble a bit from the pain. "Are you all right, Mr. Mason?" asked Nighteye as the density shifter took a moment to catch his breath. "Why, yeah," replied Slade. "I just took a bit more of a beating than I expected from that guy. I'm still good to go." "Very well," said Nighteye. But if you feel you can't keep up, I expect you to notify me or one of the pros immediately. Slade nodded in understanding as he and the rest of the officers rushed to the next wall which, for some reason, dropped all of a sudden. "Hey Clay, is everyone all right?" called the density shifter upon seeing his friends along with the two pros. "We're good, but the league dash." Clay started to respond before a high-pitched yell suddenly filled the hallway. In the next instant, the entire hallway began warping again to the worst degree yet. The floors, walls and ceiling shook as multiple earthen pillars shot out of the wall and floor before continuing on into the hallway. The cloud wielder swore as he resumed using his cloud platforms to pull some of the less agile members off the floor and away from the walls. "This is bad," thought Clay as he looked around. "It seems out of control at first glance, but everything is starting to close in." "Can anyone locate the source of that voice?" asked Aizawa as another screech rang through the hallways. "It's echoing too much for me to get a fix," said Midoriya as he started looking around. "We need to find him fast or we'll all be crushed," exclaimed the police sergeant as he moved out of the way of one of the speeding earth pillars. Slade increased his density as he deflected another emerging rock formation, just so happening to glance up as he did so. "The ceiling!" exclaimed the density shifter as he noticed a pair of eyes staring back at them. That was all the instruction Midoriya needed as he used full cowl to leap upwards, bouncing off the earthen columns before slamming his foot into the spot where all the screaming was coming from. The impact was enough to reveal the body of a man with spiked blonde hair wearing a type of red business shirt, the true form of Mimic. This one glimpse was all Eraserhead needed as he used his gaze to stop the Hasaikai member's quirk, causing him to fall the rest of the way out of the ceiling and down towards the ground. Nighteye reacted quickly and threw another one of his seals, striking Mimic's head while he was still in midair. "Grab him!" exclaimed the clairvoyant, prompting Izuku to leap around and snatch him before landing a short distance from Clay, who wasted no time in binding the Yakuza member with his clouds. "Bye-bye, Mr. Yakuza," sang the voices of both Twice and Toga, who'd been viewing the spectacle from atop two of the pillars before leaping out of sight. "Did the League just betray him?" asked Aizawa as everyone else looked on with bewildered expressions. "I think it's more accurate to say we were just used," said Nighteye with a tilt of his glasses. "Whatever the case, the maze is now clear for us to proceed." "Yeah, but with everything jumbled around, it's hard to tell which direction we should go," said the police sergeant as two of his officers got to work tying up Mimic, allowing Clay to return his clouds to floating around him. The Yakuza wasn't out for very long as he propped back up to a sitting position. It was clear he was angry given his heavy breathing, and if Clay hadn't known better he would have mistook it for that of a wild animal. "All right, Irinaka, put the walls and hallway back how they were." The Hasaikai member didn't answer, apparently too angry to even see straight right now. "I already know which direction Aries' room is," said Nighteye as he pointed down the disjointed hallway. "Besides, it seems whatever booster drag he was using has worn off. So he couldn't move it all back even if he wanted to now," said Eraserhead. "It seems Fat Gum's hunch was right on the money." "Well, we still need to worry about Toga and Twice," said the police sergeant before he was interrupted by the angry Mimic. "Twice, Toga," he seethed, "I'll get you both, you filthy traitors." "Are there any other League members here?" questioned Nighteye, "and if there are, where are they?" If I know," exclaimed Mimic, "but I'll definitely find them all, and when I do I'll break their skulls open." He devolved into unintelligible shouting after that. "It seems those two were the only ones here after all," noted Nighteye with a hint of relief. "But even if they betrayed the Hasaikai, we can't expect them not to attack us," said one of the officers as their eyes were darting around the room. "Given the League's crimes and reputation, as police officers we can't just ignore them," said the police sergeant. "Uncle," Clay whispered so that no one else would hear, "I know you said we'd be out of this operation if it was discovered that the League is involved, but given the circumstances why are you all still standing around talking?" groaned Rocklock from his position against the wall. He'd regained consciousness a few minutes ago after getting his wound bandaged. "Leave the League to the police and get moving. Remember what our top priority is." "That's true, we can hold any possible League attack off here," said the police sergeant as he turned to the rest of them. "You all need to get moving and rescue that girl. So get going." Rocklock practically yelled, Don't waste all the time the others have bought you, move. The gathered heroes glanced at each other for a moment before nodding in agreement, turning and running down the hallway. I'll definitely get her out, Rocklock. Midoriya called back with clear determination in his voice. Everyone else was driven on by their own determination as they rushed down the hallway, passing by a man in a white mask who'd been taken out by Mirio before running into another solid wall at the end of the hallway. The one for all holder wasted no time in busting open a hole in the obstacle as they emerged to find the layout of the room resembling more of a crater than an actual room. Mirio was currently engaged in battle against the young leader of the Shy Hasaikai, Kai Chisaki, and behind him was the one they'd come for. Wrapped up in Mirio's tattered cape, Eri looked on in varying degrees of fear and wonder at the ones who'd come to rescue her. Underground lair of Shy Hasai. There was little time to think as the group of heroes rushed through the hole Midoriya had just made in the wall, with the one for all holder flying straight at the plague mask wearing Yakuza leader and managing to land a powerful blow on his left arm. The force was enough to send the surprised villain sliding several feet across the floor as Aizawa used his gaze to erase his quirk at the same time. Nighteye, secure anyone that needs medical treatment. Eraserhead called out. The clairvoyant did as instructed and rushed over to his tattered and bloodied protege and the little blue-haired girl wearing nothing but rags with a horn growing out of her right temple. So that's Eri, thought Clay as he and the remaining heroes turned their attention to Chisaki, who was currently slapping the ground with his hand in a vain attempt to activate his quirk. This is our chance, let's take him down, ordered Aizawa as he, Midoriya, Clay and Slade all ran, jumped or flew towards the desperate-looking man. Damn it, wake up Chrono, yelled Chisaki with a manic glint in his eye. Aizawa realized what his intentions were and managed to push Midoriya out of the way, but in the process he was cut by an arrow that resembled a hair-like protrusion. Sensei, exclaimed Clay as he just barely dodged one of the appendages himself and located the source. One of Chisaki's main underlings, a man in a white, hooded robe wearing goggles and his own plague mask, had fired his attack from his head. Sheet, that's Chronostasis, realized the cloud wielder. He'd written him off as out of the fight upon seeing his unconscious form during their entrance. I was hoping to pierce at least most of you with the long hand to slow your movements, remarked Chronostasis as he struggled to his hands and knees, but I suppose I shouldn't expect anything less from heroes. Clay wanted to strike back at the Yakuza member until he saw Chisaki move out of the corner of his eye. Got to be quick about this, he realized as he sent a number of cloud platforms across the room. Chisaki, yelled Midoriya as he rushed towards the man, realizing almost too late that his quirk was active again. The Yakuza leader slammed his hand on the ground right as Midoriya was on top of him, causing the surface to shatter and reshape into a collection of massive spikes that towered several feet in the air while scattering the gathered heroes. Is everyone okay? Slade called out from between one of the spike formations, having sustained little damage thanks to raising his density. We're okay up here, Clay called out from his cloud perch as he had Midoriya on one cloud and Nighteye, Mirio and Eri on another, but I don't see Aizawa anywhere. I think I might know where he went, said Slade as he noted a large hole in the ground. I won't let my plans be ruined by people like you. Kai Chisaki called out suddenly as everyone noticed him approaching the body of another one of his followers, a man in a black cloak with a bird mask and wide-brimmed hat, Shin Nemoto. I won't let it all end here. He proceeded to grasp the face of his follower as the two of them were suddenly engulfed in a flash of light and swirling dust. I can admit, with my own dignity still intact, that Lemillion was stronger than me. But it all comes to nothing now, so I'll have you return Eri to me. Clay hadn't thought it was possible, but the man had actually torn apart his subordinate's body and his own with his quirk before pulling it back together into a grotesque monstrosity. Now he had 4 large, fleshy red arms and his bulk had increased by a fair bit, not to mention all of his earlier injuries from Mirio were all healed. That was the worst feeling ever for a moment, said Chisaki, but I feel much better now than I did before. While I now feel like I want to hurl, quipped Clay, more to hide his nervousness and to take stock of the situation. Lemillion was too injured to fight while Nighteye was protecting him and Eri. That left the 3 of them, but someone needed to find Eraserhead given that he'd also noticed Chronostasis was gone too. I'm something of an obsessive about cleanliness, said Chisaki. It always makes my blood boil when someone touches me, so this is the first time I've ever been forced to this point. But it's worse for you, isn't it, Lemillion? If you hadn't gotten involved with Eri and by extension me, you'd still have your quirk. But now it and your dream are lost forever, because you are all going to die. The man-made monster charged forward as he attempted to use his powers on the floor again. But Midoriya was quicker, leaping off of Clay's clouds and kicking one of the spikes towards Chisaki. The Yakuza leader managed to halt it with his hand before reforming it into spikes aimed at the hero in training. Clay reacted swiftly and yanked him away with his clouds as Nighteye launched his weighted seals at Chisaki, knocking him back slightly. I shall be his opponent, declared the pro-hero as he threw even more seals at his target. You get Mirio and Eri out of here and find Eraserhead. The deformed man moved surprisingly well despite his size, dodging out of the way of the projectiles before swiping at Nighteye with his 4 large red arms. The pro used his foresight quirk to predict his opponent's movements by a short margin, just managing to avoid his blows each time. Slade, fine sensei, ordered Clay. We'll take care of things here. On it, said Slade as he leapt down the hole he'd spotted earlier while Clay and Midoriya regrouped near Mirio and Eri. Togata, said Izuku, is it true? Is your quirk really gone? Not important right now, said Mirio as he held a hand over his bleeding side. What is important is that we get Eri here away from this place. Right, let's get out of here, said Midoriya as he kicked a hole in the wall. This is the way we came to get here. If we just follow it, we should be able to find our way out. You go on ahead and get Togata and Eri out of here, said Clay as he started walking back with his clouds swirling around him. But what are you going to do? Questioned a concerned Izuku. Obviously I'm staying and helping Nighteye, replied Clay. His foresight is good but he can't do any lasting damage to Chisaki. I'll back him up while you escape. Midoriya seemed to consider this idea for a moment before Eri suddenly spoke up. You're hurt, said Eri suddenly as she looked at some of Mirio's blood that had gotten on her hands. I'm sorry, that's enough. Hey, now isn't the time to be sheet. Clay moved his clouds towards Nighteye as Chisaki managed to find an opening and slam both of his hands downwards, causing the ground to reshape into a practical forest of spikes which came racing towards them, too fast for even the cloud wielder to pull Nighteye to safety in time. The trio could only watch as the pro-hero's arm and leg were skewered while another spike tore into his side. "Nu!" exclaimed Izuku as he slammed his foot on the ground with the energy of one for all crackling around him far more intensely than before. Clay didn't have time to comment on this as he pulled Nighteye's injured form towards them and set his body down next to Mirio and Eri. Take care of them, we've got this. The big 3-member nodded his head as his 2 fellow students rocketed forward. How impertinent, said Chisaki as he reshaped the ground and caused more spikes to come stretching towards them at high speed. Clay avoided them by moving upwards while Midoriya had a harder time dodging side to side, giving his friend the lead. Clay fired off his own set of cloud spikes at Chisaki, forcing the villain to block them with a wall of stone. Deku then slammed his foot on the ground again, forcing the villain to use his quirk to rise up on a stone pillar to avoid the destructive impact as Clay reformed his clouds into a massive hammer which he sent plummeting downwards. Chisaki managed to leap out of the way of the colliding pillars as he reached for the cloud wielder, only to be foiled in his attempt as his opponent moved back while also blasting a shroud of mist in his face. Blasted insect, he remarked as he waved his hand to disperse the mist screen before looking up and realizing it hadn't just been an escape tactic. Midoriya had used his moment of distraction to leap all the way up before pushing off the ceiling, falling at high speed with a powerful heel drop maneuver. Manchester smash! Yelled Midoriya as he brought his one-for-all powered foot downward and cratered a large section of the ground. If Clay had to guess, his friend was somehow running at 20% despite the pain, but that wasn't the biggest issue right now. His attack had missed Chisaki's head by just the barest margin. You may be fast, but in comparison to the last 2, said Chisaki as he moved back and put his hand on some rubble, your moves are simple and easy to read. Another group of spikes raced towards Izuku, but just as he was about to be impaled, a large cloud hand grabbed him and pulled him backwards as Clay tagged in. Try reading this. exclaimed Clay as he sent out a pair of cloud buzz saws at the Yakuza boss. Easily, said Chisaki as he caught them with his hands and used his quirk to make them burst apart. Such simple attacks as that won't itch. The man cried out in pain as the clouds he'd just torn apart had reformed into bear traps that clamped onto his arms. Your quirk's impressive, admitted Clay as he used his control over the traps to pull the villain up into the air, but it looks like you can't destroy the control I have over my clouds. Tear them apart all you like, I'll just put them back or make something new out of the remains. Why are you heroes so irritating? Spat Chisaki as he reached up and used his quirk to tear apart his arms to free himself before reforming them. It might heal me, but it still hurts to tear myself apart first you bees. He slammed his hands on the ground again as soon as he landed, forcing Clay and Midoriya to take action as they moved out of the way of his apparently signature spike attack. Clay countered with his own set of large cloud arrows that he sent flying at his opponent. You won't catch me off guard like that again, declared Chisaki as he rushed forward, tearing through the cloud projectiles with his hands before charging at their wielder. He was forced to the side, however, as he narrowly avoided a kick from Midoriya which managed to smash part of the ground. Clay acted quickly and reformed his projectiles to drive him even further back as Midoriya leapt up and off some of the rubble to attempt another strike. Chisaki tried to bring his hands to the ground again but was stopped by 4 Pac-Man-like clouds which clamped onto his wrists. He only avoided being knocked out by using his 2 upper arms to block the blow, breaking them in the process while also disintegrating the clouds on his wrists to free up his movement. Izuku can't keep up this level of movement much longer, thought Clay as he reformed his clouds into 2 spinning discs to keep Chisaki on his toes, only allowing him to heal himself as he dodged both the discs and another near miss from Midoriya. The result was another broken arm for Chisaki as Clay also managed to embed one of his discs in Chisaki's upper arm. Miserable vermin, yelled the Hasaikai leader as he tore apart and healed his arms before rushing them again. It became a pattern of combinations and near misses on both sides, with Clay working to keep their opponent from touching the ground when he could while also trying to get an opening for Midoriya. Half the time, though, he had to pull Deku away when the villain managed to dodge his attack by a hair-thin margin before swiping at him or managing to get one of his hands on the ground to use more spike attacks. It stayed like this for a couple of minutes before Clay and Midoriya regrouped with the one-for-all holder currently struggling to stand due to the repeated strain on his body. I'm fed up with all of this, said Chisaki as he tore apart his arm and the clouds stuck in it before reforming them into a healed state with a mouth on his hand. It's about time you realized the futility of your actions. He held up the hand with the new mouth as it shouted at an incredibly high volume, Eri. 2 people are about to die because of you? Is that really something you want? Dude, are you trying to give us an earache? Questioned Clay as he made a show of cleaning out his left ear. It's a nice noisemaker you got there, but it's not very truthful about our chances. This fight is already over. You're quite right, said Chisaki as he pointed behind them, and she knows it. Clay and Midoriya looked back and stiffened as they noticed that Eri had returned and climbed back through the hole in the wall. What are you doing? Go back and stay with Lemillion. Izuku called back. But I don't want anyone else to die, said Eri with a mixture of fear and resignation in her voice. That's right, said the mouth on Chisaki's hand. Do you really think either of them are capable of winning against me? I don't, admitted Eri as she held her hands in a prayer-like gesture. Clay realized then that the villain was somehow making use of Nemoto's quirk, confession, to make her give this admission. Then what do you think you should do? Questioned Chisaki. Come back, answered Eri, but, in exchange, please put everyone back the way they were. That's right, declared Chisaki. It's much easier to get hurt yourself than to let others get hurt for your sake. He turned to the 2 students then. Can you see now that you're both acting in the cruelest way possible for her, giving her false hope? She doesn't want either of you. Even if that's the case, said Midoriya with gritted teeth, we'll still save her. Because that's what the needs, added Clay, and what's more, she doesn't need a parasite like you in her life. No, what she needs right now is for someone to cover her eyes. Also quite right, said Chisaki, it would be quite traumatic for her to see even more people suffer because of, what is, it. The Yakuza leader howled in pain as a number of spikes suddenly shot out of his right hand. And you need to quit your babbling now, said Clay as he clenched his fist, causing even more spikes to shoot out of Chisaki's other arm. What in the world, Clay, what did you do? Asked Izuku with clear surprise written all over his face. Before I answer that, you'd best do what I said earlier and cover Eri's eyes and maybe her ears too, said Clay. This next part's gonna get graphic? Izuku nodded and moved over to Eri while Chisaki tore apart and reformed his arms. You beastly hero, how did you do that? Raged Chisaki as he started to advance. Oh, you mean this, said Clay as he flexed his fingers, causing thorny cloud vines to pop out of Chisaki's two upper arms, resulting in the Yakuza leader biting back another yell of pain. I discreetly slipped in small amounts of my clouds during your little repair sessions every time you broke apart your arms to fix them or escape my cloud's hold. Given that your quirk only works on one form of matter at a time, I'm surprised you didn't notice how they were behaving. That's surprisingly clever, said Chisaki as he reached up and grabbed the arms with his other set of hands, but it's pointless now that I know what's happening. He used his quirk to reform his arms back to their original uninjured state. Now then, where were WDA? I believe I was tormenting you, said Clay as he flexed his fingers again and caused more cloud thorns to emerge from Chisaki's arms, but my memory may be a little fuzzy in that regard. I am possible, spat the villain as he fixed his arms once again, only to have curved blades sprout out of them next. Your clouds should have separated from me once I used my quirk, so why? If they behaved like normal clouds they would, explained Clay, but I'm using my quirk to keep them attached on the inside during the rebuilding process. They're basically a part of you now. That can't be, raged Chisaki as he fixed his arms yet again only to have more spikes erupt out. Of them. As I mentioned before, said Clay, it's clear to me now that while your quirk is powerful, you can only use it on one form of matter at a time. And, given that you need to have physical contact to use your quirk, you won't be able to reach the clouds as long as they remain buried beneath your skin. You miserable piece of Chisaki yelled out as his opponent made sharpened cloud blades shoot out of his hands, keeping him from touching the ground. So tell me, what's it like, said Clay as he waited for Chisaki to fix himself before damaging him with his clouds again. How's it feel to be tormented because of your quirk? He extended more blades, forcing the villain to heal himself again. What is it like to be torn apart, put back together, and torn apart over and over and over again? He flexed his hand each time he said the word over, tearing new holes in the Yakuza leader's arms before waiting for him to fix himself. It was you who said it was easier to get hurt yourself than to let others get hurt for you, right? Said Clay as more spikes and blades were brought forth to injure his adversary. How's it feel when you're the one enduring the pain, torture, and anguish? The villain yelled in pain once more as he was injured, fixed himself, then injured again. It's only because of your quirk that I'm able to do this, so let's see how much you can actually take. The room was filled with Chisaki's cries of agony for the next few minutes as he attempted and failed over and over again to use his quirk offensively, only to resort to healing himself instead as his injuries became too great. Clay, that's enough, said Deku as he witnessed the villain's deteriorating state. We're supposed to be heroes, we have to bring him in alive. I know, said Clay as he took a deep breath. I suppose I should go ahead and say this can all be over if you just surrender, Chisaki. Or we can keep dragging it out, which I could do all day at this point. Why, you wretched trash, said Chisaki between breaths as he struggled to stand back up. I won't let my ambitions be stopped here by the likes of some kids. And here I was told you were supposed to be smart, quipped Clay as he held his hand up to extend the clouds in his body once more. But just as he was about to use his quirk again, the ceiling burst open as the real Rikia Katsukame came plummeting in along with Ryukyu, Uraraka, and Tsuyu. This turn of events would go on to reshape the whole rest of the battle. Hasaikai Underground Lair. It all happened in an instant. One moment Clay was tormenting Chisaki with clouds he'd snuck into his constantly rebuilding body, and the next, the ceiling burst open above them. The cloud user had stiffened at first upon seeing the body of Rikia Katsukame until he realized who had slammed him through the ground in the first place. It's Ryukyu, Tsuyu, and Uraraka? Said a surprised Midoriya. Hey, it's Deku, wait, said Uraraka as she used her quirk to keep Rikia floating. How can you be here? You were just up there a second ago. There can't be two Midoriyas, so who's the other one? Questioned Tsuyu, who currently had her tongue wrapped around Rikia's body. It must be the League of Villains, said Ryukyu in her dragon form as she held down the Yakuza member. We need 2 no. Nae, Togata, exclaimed Uraraka as her gaze also fell on the 2 injured heroes near the entrance hole. Get them to an ambulance, quick, exclaimed Midoriya as he rushed towards Eri. We need 2 . He was interrupted by the ground suddenly shifting and changing as a pillar shot the little horned girl into the air while a pair of branching spikes all shot out of the ground towards the heroes. Sheet! Exclaimed Clay as he attempted to use his quirk to stop Chisaki. But it failed as he realized the villain had used the moment of distraction caused by Rikia crashing through the roof to heal his arms while also expelling the clouds within them. You disgusting heroes have screwed up all of my plans, exclaimed Chisaki as he created a pillar beneath himself that rose into the air, catching Eri in the process. You're not going anywhere, exclaimed Clay as he rocketed up towards the rising pillar on his clouds. Midoriya came up the other side using full cowl to leap off of the debris that had begun falling from the ceiling due to the shifting of the room. The Yakuza leader turned to face them, but as he was about to use his quirk, Eri reached out and grabbed a hold of Mirio's cape which had been sent airborne by the battle. As she did so, her body let out a burst of yellow energy from her horn which caused Chisaki to actually split from his henchmen as they both reverted back to their original human forms, disorienting them both for the moment. We won't let him have you, declared Clay as he created a cloud platform for Midoriya to jump off of while also sending a couple of smaller ones up to fend off the rubble between them. Eri, called the One for All holder as he stretched his hand out in midair. Amazingly, the timid girl who seemed to have no hope only moments ago, took a leap of faith off of the pillar and landed in Midoriya's arms. Give her back now, raged a recovered Chisaki as he used his quirk to tear apart portions of the pillar and reshape them into giant tendrils racing towards the 3 of them. The heck you will, said Clay as he created a cloud cushion around his friend and Eri as to help him dodge around the pillars. Midoriya, look for an opportunity to jump out of here and leave this BS to me. But I can't just leave Izuku started to argue before another wave of pillars started coming their way. Our priority is to save that little girl's life, Clay called back. You promised you wouldn't let her go this time, right? Deku's eyes widened as he remembered his promise before narrowing in determination. Just give me an opening, said the green-haired boy as Clay maneuvered them around even more tendrils and up towards the surface. Chisaki's desperation was clear now as he actually leapt off the pillar after them, his outstretched hand reaching towards Midoriya as Clay narrowly guided them through the twisting and quickly forming tendrils. But some of the tendrils had bent back towards them, attempting to trap the 2 of them there. None of them, however, were quite fast enough for what happened next. We will save you, declared Midoriya as the energy of One for All flared to even more incredible heights as he pushed off of Clay's cloud with all of his might. It was far stronger than any jump he'd ever done as the air pressure wave actually demolished the stone tendrils around them and sent both Clay and the Yakuza leader flying away from the impact point. The UA student managed to form a tough but flexible cushion to minimize the damage from his fall before rolling off of it into a half-kneeling position. Now that was a jump, he thought as he smiled, noticing that his mask and goggles had also been torn off from the air pressure wave. What in the world just happened? Said Ryukyu as her dragon head looked around the scene and found no sign of Deku. That was probably a jump with his quirk at 100% power, surmised Clay as he hovered next to the dragon hero. That's the only time I've seen shockwaves that size from him. So where is oh no, Chisaki, said Uraraka as everyone followed her gaze to see the villain a fair distance away staggering to his feet before using his quirk to fix his broken arm. Naughty girl Eri, said the Hasaikai head as he walked unsteadily through the rubble, using your power on me of all people. He proceeded to reach down for something in the rubble. Not good, said Clay as he sped over towards their enemy just as he touched the body of Rikia Katsukame. I need your power to realize the old man's dream. exclaimed the increasingly insane-sounding villain as his and Rikia's body was torn apart and reshaped once again into that of an even larger, more grotesque creature with 6 red arms that stood 10 feet tall if not more on 2 massive legs. A slightly inhuman growl sounded from the head of the monster, which had been shaped into a large version of Katsukame's mask as it revealed the upper body of the Yakuza leader in its mouth. As it spread its arms out and reached for the wall, a cloud nail jammed into the hand and knocked it away. "I told him to leave you to me," said Clay as he released a large number of clouds from his body, throwing his usual caution with his quirk to the wind, "and I don't intend on ever letting you near that girl again." "Meddlesome pest," growled the Chisaki hybrid as it glanced back at him before slamming one of its other hands on the ground. "Be gone already." Clay dodged out of the way as several stone tendrils erupted from the ground and swatted at him before countering with a half-dozen large cloud nails, sticking them all where the arms began on the malformed body. But he didn't feel the skin give as Chisaki whirled around and swung at him with his elongated arms, forcing Clay to raise, lower and even jump off one of the arms before reshaping his clouds into the thickest buzzsaw he could make and slamming at one of the arms. He spun it as fast as it would go, creating sparks before finally drawing a bit of blood. "Pathetic," growled the hybrid man as he swatted the construct aside with another one of his massive hands. "This is real power." He touched the ground again, causing more spiraling tendrils to come his way, which forced the cloud wielder to increase his height in the room before reforming his clouds into drills. "The skin's too thick for me to cut quickly, so I'll go for the actual body," thought Clay as he sent the drills rocketing towards the body's head. The massive hands were too slow to stop the drills, but the mouth was just fast enough to close as the projectiles impacted against it and began rotating at high speed. Once again, unfortunately, they weren't strong enough as Chisaki reached up with 2 of his new giant hands and used his quirk to disperse the clouds. "My skin is much thicker now that I've bonded with Rikia. You pulled a nice trick earlier, but now that it's rendered useless, you're little more than a nuisance to me." "You make it sound like this nuisance only has one worthwhile trick," Clay shot back as he reformed his clouds into a collar with spikes that jammed into the necks of the monster that was Chisaki. "But what do you think of this? Grasping thunder." Bolts of electricity shot out of the clouds and into the body of the villain, producing a roar of more rage than pain as he dissolved the collar with his quirk to stop the attack. The cloud wielder used that opening to reshape his clouds into several handcuff-like bindings that wrapped around and pulled Chisaki's 6 giant hands together. The beast struggled to reach the bonds but couldn't as they were all located behind its wrists, preventing the Yakuza leader from using his quirk. "Now try a second shock," exclaimed Clay as he used his lightning attack yet again. While this was going on, Uraraka, Tsuyu and the others were looking on in a mixture of admiration and worry. "He's winning," Uraraka thought aloud as she tried to struggle to her feet before collapsing back to her knees. "Please tell me he's winning." "He's surviving at the moment," replied Tsuyu, "but I don't know how much longer that'll last." "Clay will survive if he doesn't pursue Chisaki," said the wounded Nighteye suddenly, "but he won't be able to defeat him. Then we need to get over there and help Yuch." Ryukyu stumbled back to the ground, her own strength still drained thanks to Rikia's quirk from earlier. "I'm afraid none of you are in any condition to go after them," coughed Nighteye as Tsuyu continued to put pressure on the wound in his side. "Once Chisaki escapes those bonds, he'll go after Eri and kill Midoriya to get to her." "What? But that can't be Dash," Uraraka started to say before a massive roar filled the destroyed room. "I've had enough of your interference, you demon filthy hero," roared Chisaki as his arms managed to tear out of the cloud bonds that had been electrocuting him before slamming on the ground. His quirk activated then as the entire section of floor he was standing on and around him shifted and warped. The monster of a villain was lifted upwards by a large rising pillar while a mass of spikes shot out in all directions, growing even more spikes along the way. Clay was forced backwards as he narrowly avoided being impaled before getting trapped between a number of other spikes. "Not good," thought Clay as the spikes began to close in on him, threatening to crush him. "I got one chance at this, so here's hoping physics works the way Slade says it does." The UA student wrapped his clouds around his body, directing himself towards the large hole in the ceiling as he felt the space around him shrinking little by little every second. He adjusted the density and pliability as quickly as he could, and then, the hardest part, he waited. The pressure continued to build as his clouds were squeezed like a stress ball until finally the reaction he'd been waiting for occurred. The current elastic nature of his clouds propelled him upwards as the stone pillars filled the space where he'd just been. Clay flew upwards several feet before using his quirk to call his clouds back into their signature cloud armor set as he exited to the surface to find Chisaki confronting Midoriya. The hero in training was understandably surprised to see his friend still standing given that he should have had a broken leg, but it did give him an opportunity. It also helped that the Hasaikai leader was currently monologuing about Eri's quirk. "Her quirk isn't simple cancellation," said Chisaki as he stared down at Midoriya and Eri while Clay maneuvered around behind him. "She can actually rewind someone's evolution back to a time before there were quirks. What Eri truly represents, what she truly is change." His massive reconfigured body began to lumber forward as Clay gathered his clouds and began building up as much electricity in them as he could. "I still haven't gotten this move 100% complete," thought Clay as he produced even more clouds to join with the current mass in the air, "but it's the only shot I've got right now for taking out an opponent like this in a single blow. I'm the only one who knows how to use an asset like Eri," continued Chisaki, "and with her quirk I will cure this world." He hit the ground then, sending out his signature stone tendrils towards Midoriya and Eri. "Shit, it's not ready," thought Clay as he spun the clouds at high speed, "but it's gonna have to, huh?" He'd blinked right before sending out his attack, and in that time Midoriya had seemingly disappeared then reappeared right beneath Chisaki before kicking him with a massive amount of force. It was so powerful, in fact, that his entire massive body was sent rocketing into the air high above the neighborhood. "Wait a minute," thought the UA student as he watched the battle in the air. "Eri rewinds people, does that include injuries?" Apparently it did, as Chisaki attempted to reform new arms and legs, only to get them blown off again by the one-for-all user. If that's true, then Midoriya can operate on 100% power for as long as he needs. And he was using it as he smashed the villain's reformed limbs over and over in midair until he found an opening and slammed his fist into the Yakuza leader's face, knocking off his mask and sending him back to Earth. Unfortunately, it was also right towards the same area he'd been launched from. "On nuts," Clay blurted out as he just managed to fly up and clear the area before the massive body impacted, blowing up a cloud of dust. Now that was a show. I wonder what Midoriya thinks about right he's still up there. The UA student looked up just in time to see his friend falling back towards Earth before forming a cushion with his clouds to catch both him and Eri. "Clay, is he?" questioned Midoriya as One-for-All's energy still swirled around him. "I think so," replied Clay as he glanced at the Hasaikai leader's unmoving form, noting the vacant expression on his face. "Kai Chisaki is beaten at last. I think you may have just won." Underground lair of the Shy Hasaikai. "The battle up there is getting rather intense," thought Chronostasis as he removed his mask to reveal a man with long white hair that ended in a few arrow points. "Kai shouldn't lose, he's fought plenty of ferocious opponents. At least that's what the Yakuza member wanted to think. But as he did, flashes of the one known as Lemillion went through his mind, causing doubts to form as he realized that the heroes sent after them were quite ferocious in their own way. A stirring near his feet told him that Aizawa was starting to regain some movement. "I hit him with the short hand, so he won't regain full movement for an hour. But it's already been several minutes since the confrontation started." The sound of fighting intensified again as the dust from the roof was shaken off by the rumbling from above. It would continue on like this for a bit longer as Chrono waited for his leader to appear. There was even a point when all of the rumbling stopped, bringing a bit of hope to the expendable member. But fate had other plans as the rumbling of battle resumed. By this point, Aizawa was attempting to crawl away, inching little by little towards the door that led out of the room. Even if Msr Chisaki loses, he finally thought, I can still take the completed product with me and find a way to get it produced. A sample of the Erasure Hero's blood would also be worth having to investigate for future projects. The Yakuza member proceeded to pull out a tanto-like knife, hesitating for just a moment as he made his final decision. "For the Hasaikai," said Chronostasis, "and for Kai." He gripped the knife with both hands as he readied to plunge it into Eraserhead's back where his heart would be. But a figure descended from the ceiling suddenly, swinging on a cable attached to a gauntlet on his arm. Chrono only had time to raise his arm to protect his head as the hero slammed both feet into him, sending him crashing to the floor and the knife sliding away into the shadows. The new arrival dropped down completely next to Eraserhead, crouching protectively as he reeled the cable back into his gauntlet and scanned the room for any other possible enemies before his eyes settled back on the only other person in the room. Kurono, better known as the villain Chronostasis, he said, "Not that I expect you to, but the rest of your buddies have been either arrested or are being beat down as we speak. So why don't you make this easy on all of us and come quietly?" "You'll never defeat the Hasaikai," exclaimed Chronostasis as he sent one of the gray arrows from his head at the hero, only for it to veer off course after hitting his skin. "I already know the limitations of your quirk," said the hero as he managed to grab a hold of the arrow before it could retract. "As for mine, well, my hero name is Dark Matter, so you try and figure out what that means." "Easy." "Hero," exclaimed Chrono as he struck Dark Matter with his shorthand arrow from his head over and over again in an attempt to free his long hand. But it was like he was hitting a solid stone wall with all the weight of a boulder. No matter how hard he pulled or how many times he struck his opponent, the hero didn't even flinch. "You won't bring me in dash." His outburst was cut short with the latest yank of his head as his opponent's weight seemed to suddenly decrease drastically until he was as light as a baseball. And like a baseball, he was rocketing right towards the villain. Chronostasis attempted to dodge the incoming attack, but given his opponent still had a hold of his long hand arrow that was attached and reeling back into his head, there was little he could do. Right before Dark Matter struck, his weight seemed to increase again as he kneed his opponent in the face with all the force of a swinging sack of bricks. The villain was almost certain he lost a tooth as he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Geez, these fanatical follower types are always such a pain," said Slade as he pulled out some specialized handcuffs he'd received before the raid commenced and locked the Yakuza member's hands behind his back. He quickly tossed him next to the door before moving over to check on Aizawa. "Hey sensei, how's the feeling in your limbs right now?" "I've been better," replied the 1A homeroom teacher as Slade pulled him up off the ground and slung his arm over his shoulder. Just as he was standing up, the door to the room opened, causing the hero and student to both go on guard until they saw it was a pair of police officers followed by a pretty injured Amajiki supporting a likely unconscious Mirio on his left side. "Dark Matter, Eraserhead," said Amajiki, remembering at the last moment to use their hero names. "It looks like you've got things more or less in hand here." "Kurono is out cold," said the UA student as he indicated the unconscious man. "Sensei is still recovering from the effects of that guy's quirk though." "What about you and Lemillion?" "We'll live," replied Amajiki. "I'm more concerned about what Mirio will do now that his quirk is gone." Slade was about to answer to that when his frog-quirked classmates suddenly came bounding up to them from the hallway outside the door. "You're all okay," observed Suyu as she stopped next to Sun Eater and Lemillion. "And what about things on your end, Froppy?" asked Slade. "I noticed the rumblings finally stopped." "It has," replied Suyu, "but you need to bring Sensei up quick to help Deku and Clay." Even with her frog features usually making her mood unreadable, it was obvious to Slade how worried she was, and with good reason. In front of the Hasaikai compound, Clay wasn't often lost for words, especially not after witnessing the grand finale that was All Might's United States of Smash against All for One. But even then he'd only been able to witness it from a screen several city blocks away. What had just happened before his very eyes, though, was still nothing short of amazing. Midoriya had managed to achieve and to some extent control One for All full cowling at 100% power. He hadn't done it alone, of course. It was all thanks to Ares' power that he wasn't in pieces right now from using his own quirk at such an output. The one who was in pieces, though, was Kai Chisaki as half of his body was currently sticking out of what could be considered the mouth of the abomination he'd created by fusing himself with Rikiya Katsukame. Hopefully he stays down, thought Clay as he turned his attention back to his friend who was still glowing with the energy of One for All while Ares' body was shining with its own yellow energy. An energy which seemed to be getting stronger. "Ares, are you alright?" Midoriya got his answer in the form of the little girl's quirk intensifying as the yellow light glowed even brighter. "Midoriya, get her to establish that off or get her away from you now," exclaimed Clay as he recalled how her powers worked. She was able to rewind people and other living things, even to the point of them disappearing completely. Now that Izuku wasn't exerting himself using his destructive quirk anymore, the only thing to rewind was him in his current state. A sudden stirring caught the Cloud user's attention then as he turned and saw a semi-conscious Chisaki somehow moving one of the massive arms of his fused body towards Eri and Deku. Thinking quickly, Clay sent two of his clouds out, cutting Mirio's cape off of his friend while using the other cloud to fling the girl right towards the monster's hand. "You want her quirk so bad, then take it?" exclaimed Cirrus as the horned girl came into contact with the limb. As before, the reaction was fairly instantaneous as the entire body dissolved, or rather, separated back into the bodies of Overhaul and Rikia. Clay reformed his clouds to catch Eri and bring her back to the ground as another voice rang out from overhead. "Gunhead martial arts," exclaimed Uraraka as she came floating in from the side and grabbed Overhaul's wrists, pulling them both behind his back before floating him down to the ground in a SBM's and hold. "Your timing couldn't have been any better," remarked Clay as he set Eri down gently on the ground, "and sorry about flinging you through the air like that little oh-sheet, it's still not stopping." If nothing else, her quirk seemed to have only grown stronger as the light intensified. "What's the situation, Uravity?" questioned Ryukyu in her dragon form as she dragged herself out of the hole, followed by Tsu and Slade carrying Aizawa while Amajiki supported Mirio. "Overhaul and Katsukame are both down," reported Uraraka. "Clay and Midoriya are safe too, but I'm not sure what's happening with Eri. Her quirk's in overdrive right now," explained Clay as they continued to witness the girl's glowing ability. "Not a single person can touch her while it's active or they'll be rewound back to nothing." "Dark matter, Froppy," said Eraserhead weakly, still currently unable to move his body. The two U8 students understood his intentions, though, and held his head up so he had a direct line of sight. A familiar glow came to his eyes as his hair stood on end for a moment, the sign that his quirk was activating. As it did, the light surrounding Eri was extinguished as the girl collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. "Eri!" exclaimed Midoriya as he rushed over and picked the sleeping girl up, checking her over for injuries. Everyone else breathed a sigh of relief at the scene as realizations slowly crept into each of their minds. It was finally over, they'd won. But it had all come at a cost. Nearby hospital. "This is a different future than the one I saw," Clay repeated to himself in his mind. Those had been Nighteye's parting words before he was put in an ambulance and rushed to the nearest trauma center. The rest of the heroes, students, and police officers who had received any injuries were also sent there. Anyone else who was still able had assisted in rounding up the remaining Hasaikai members and loading them into armored police vans bound for prison. Clay and Slade had been some of the few who hadn't been hit by Katsukame's quirk, so they assisted in checking the damage around the area with Nijire Hato and a few others. Afterwards, they'd also gone to the hospital in order to get Slade checked over, given he'd taken something of a beating from Twice's clone of Rappa. He and Izuku wound up with separate doctors checking them over, meaning the two were done at different times. This meant Clay somehow wound up being the one to fetch Midoriya while Slade went on ahead. But they weren't walking alone for long as, to their surprise, Aizawa was already back up, having apparently only needed 10 stitches for whatever injuries he'd sustained during the raid. "So, how's everyone else doing?" asked Midoriya as the three of them were led down the hallway by Aizawa. "Kirishima received multiple lacerations and bruises from his fight against Rappa, but he'll be fine once it all heals up," replied Aizawa. "Amajiki has a cracked bone in his face, but that's the only major injury he has and it won't leave a scar. Fat Gum suffered some broken bones in a few places himself, but he seems relatively well otherwise. The knife wound Rock Lock received didn't hit anything vital, so he'll just need some time for it to heal up." "I'm glad to hear they're all okay," said Midoriya with an obvious hint of relief in his voice. "And what about Eri?" "She developed something of a fever after I shut her quirk down," replied Aizawa. "She's still sleeping, but the doctors have decided to quarantine her." "I take it there's still a lot we don't know about her quirk then," surmised Clay. All we know is what we saw when she was on Midoriya's back, replied Eraserhead. She appears unable to control her rewinding quirk. So we can't even see her right now, said Izuku as he lowered his head slightly dejectedly. The only reason you were able to touch her in the first place, at least according to Clay, is because you were continually damaging your body with your quirk, said Aizawa. There aren't a lot of people who have a condition like that. For the moment, I'm the only one who'd be able to stop her quirk if it went out of control again. Fortunately for you, her quirk only appears to affect people, said Clay. That's why I was able to get her away from you with my clouds. Yeah, if you two hadn't stepped in, I'm not entirely sure what could have happened, admitted Midoriya, so thanks for that. It will also make training her rather difficult, said Aizawa. A quirk that rewinds people is not a simple matter, and that's before you factor in her current emotional state. Painful as it is, the most logical course of action right now is to keep her quarantined for the time being. It also means we won't be able to use it now, said Slade, who was currently leaning against the wall outside of an automatic door. Oh Slade, how are you feeling? Asked a mildly surprised Izuku. Clay had told him about the beating he'd taken, but he knew his friend was a stubborn one when it came to staying down. I'm fine physically, replied Slade, but my mood is about to be shot to pieces. Midoriya could only tilt his head in confusion at that statement. You'll see. The group proceeded to pass through the opening doors then. To the surprise of at least one of them, All Might was there along with Bubble Girl, Centipeder and Recovery Girl. All Might and Recovery Girl is here too, observed the green-haired boy. I called them, said Bubble Girl with a hollow tone to her voice as tears began to well up in her eyes. I thought it was best, because Sir was always talking about All Might. She couldn't continue as she began to break down in sobs before the gathered heroes and students. Centipeder was quick to hand her a handkerchief as a surgeon stepped forward to give them the news. We've done all we can, he said, but he lost too much blood and his injuries were too extensive. It's amazing he's even remained alive this long. And in his exhausted state, there's little that I could do with my quirk either, said Recovery Girl in a somber tone as realization struck each one of them on who was being discussed. It is unlikely Sir Nighteye will live through the day, said the surgeon. A sudden groan drew their attention then as All Might rushed over to his former sidekick. All Might, said Nighteye weakly through the oxygen mask over his mouth. He was hooked up to at least half a dozen hoses and wires around his wounds, all meant to monitor his vitals and deliver him the necessary emergency fluids. Despite his condition, though, the man somehow managed to add a bit of humor to his next line. So you finally managed to come down and visit me? I don't really have anything to say to that, admitted All Might with a forced smile. I put you through so much unnecessary pain after all. Nighteye, said Midoriya as he also rushed to his bedside. You have to keep fighting, you have to do your best to live. You don't need to apologize, said the former sidekick to All Might. I never resented you. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy. If choosing to fight was truly your wish. You should fight too, said All Might as tears started to form in his eyes. Give me a chance to atone for what I did back then and everything else up until now. There's no need for you to atone, breathed Nighteye. I was the one who wanted to change your future. I kept looking for a way where you wouldn't die. But to no avail. It wasn't until I saw Midoriya today that I finally believed it was possible. Perhaps it has something to do with energy and a strong vision with no room for doubt. I'm sure it wasn't just Midoriya, but the energy of everyone believing strongly in it that brought everything together. Nighteye paused to take a ragged breath before he continued. I thought it was the result of that energy converging on Midoriya and bringing about the future when it was released. The future really is uncertain, and it was you, Midoriya, that changed my thinking. That alone is enough for me. My only true regret is exclaimed Mirio in hospital clothing and bandages as he came limping into the room and over to his mentor's bedside. You can't, please don't die. You have to live. Mirio, said All Might's former sidekick as he took in the sight of his protege, you went through a lot because of me. If only I'd been a little I was only able to become strong because you taught me, exclaimed Mirio as tears spilled forth from his eyes. I'm able to live the way I am now because of you. So please live, so that you can keep teaching me. Forgive me, Mirio, said Night. When I first had you brought to me, it was merely as a vessel for one for all. But you followed me, believed in me. Before I knew it, you'd become my greatest pride. He reached up and felt his disciple's cheek as his scara turned black while his irises became purple, the sign of his foresight quirk activating. You'll be a fine hero, finer than anyone else. That is the only future that should remain unchanged. So remember to smile. After all, a society without humor or cheer has no bright future. The light left his eyes then, but the smile remained on his face. The former sidekick and pro-hero Nighteye passed away that day, having given his life to save one little girl from the clutches of a madman. But his hope for a bright future would continue to live on as those who remained vowed to press on and make it a reality.